Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. How's everyone doing this morning?
Still alive.
Can't
Morning.
complain.
I have coffee, so all will be well.
Coffee.
Coffee. My one true love.
Some disagreement about what time of day it is.
Yeah,
these
it's almost
time
like we live
travelers.
on a globe and there are different time zones, but that can't be true because
Yeah, because that's like a big conspiracy, and we're not
Yeah,
allowed
we
to
all
go
know
to
the
it.
sun is small and local. I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
the
guys.
Bible says
it
No.
that.
just has a magically warping lampshade.
No, it's time cube.
Also, the cats
time
are pushing
cube.
everything slowly off the end of the earth. So,
Okay.
that's how we know it's flat.
Okay. All right, then. So, last week we did Deuteronomy 32, and everybody made that out like a big deal. But I guess we're on the downside of Deuteronomy now, right?
Not
Yes.
really.
Kind of.
33 is
It's
also
less exciting.
well, I would say 33 is very also as important as the blessing, the Song of Moses, because it's all about the tribes. This is the blessings of Moses in Deuteronomy 33, and 34 is the death of Moses. So yeah,
I
we're
can't wait
to
to the part where Moses tells us how he died.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the stuff there we've already kind of covered before. Not like in super detail, but we've mentioned like the different ideas about that.
Well,
But
they've been spoilering his death all season. This has been in every finishing bit of an episode. So yeah, it's not exactly a surprise at this point.
right, yeah.
Although it didn't take him
Does
quite
he
as
do a
many
Stark
revised-
move? Does he do a Stark move where he's like his last act is to save the world?
No. He just dies poor and alone on a mountain, being edged by God into oblivion, as Tomer put it before the show. Slightly.
Yeah, like
I
Edda
noticed
Stark.
that's what happens with everybody that's on a mission from God. I saw the Blues Brothers. I saw how that worked out. That was theologically correct, because that's what happened to everybody on a mission from God. They end up, destitute and alone and in prison or what have you.
And dying without ever seeing the ends for which they suffered their entire lives. Yeah. God's very, very bad at everything.
Oh, and by the way,
Except genocide. He's really good at genocide. Play to your strengths.
by the
Yes,
But he
way,
can't do it by himself. He needs help.
yeah, I have a cold, so I'll speak like this because of that. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Tomer, you sound normal.
Yeah, you sound completely normal.
Really?
Yeah.
I usually have my upper pitch voice. Now it's that. So
It's a little bit more raspy, like you're getting ready to do a rock concert, but it's in the same tonal range.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll see when we get to the commentary if that
Same
maybe
Toma
what's the
range.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tomer's got a cold, so he's going to talk like this for the rest of the day. I'm a Libra, so I'm going to talk like this for the rest of the day. Doesn't really make a lot of difference. All right. So who's reading today?
I can. I think my
Yeah.
my toys are working.
Read up to 19.
Ooh.
We're gonna get a bit of Yahweh origin story here as well, possibly.
Ooh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah,
Okay,
read up to
19.
Here.
All
And
right.
Chrissy.
So Yahweh's origin story. He was just some guy, a clerk in a store, and then he became a Mormon and got married in the temple. And then when he died, he got his own planet, and therefore now he's God.
It
Oh,
checks out.
not that far off.
Yeah, he used
I'd
his wife
watch
for
that play.
leverage and then ditched her, and she did
I'd
not
watch
do the
that
first
play.
one. Yeah.
I'd watch that play. Yahweh, the Mormon from Krypton.
And his last day in the store. I'm not even supposed to be here today. Anyway.
Okay.
All right, so begin, please.
E. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. He said, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. Surely it is you who love the people. All the holy ones are in your hand. At your feet they all bow down. and from you receive instruction, the law that Moses gave us, the possession of the assembly of Jacob. He was king over Jeshurun. When the leaders of the people assembled, along with the tribes of Israel, let Reuben live and not die, nor his people be few. And this he said about Judah. Hear, Lord, the cry of Judah. Bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes. About Levi he said, your Thummim and Urim belong to your faithful servant. You tested him at Massah. You contend with him at the waters of Meribah. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Blessed all his skills, Lord, and be pleased with the works of his hands. Strike down those who rise against him, his foes, till they rise no more. About Benjamin he said, let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. About Joseph he said, may the Lord bless his land with the precious dew from heaven above, and with the deep waters that lie below. With the best the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield. With the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains, and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills. With the best gifts of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the burning bush. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty he is like a firstborn bull. His horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim. Such are the thousands of Manasseh, one of those. About Zebulun he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer the sacrifices of the righteous. They will feast on the abundance of the seas, on the treasures hidden in the sand.
You're muted, Aaron. You're muted.
Aaron, you're muted.
Sorry, chaos over here. All right, so some of this reminds me of another book I read that seems to go on and on forever. Yes, you did. He has suffered with you. He went through everything you went through, and now he has come here with you. He's very close, listening to every word you say. Anybody recognize that?
Oh, that's the Rig Veda. No, I'm kidding. joke.
A better
right,
written
never
Disney
mind.
book? Surely not.
Yeah.
Which
Okay,
author
so
is that?
Quite a few things here. So I actually want to point out, so on my first reading of this chapter years ago now, so for verse 6, may Reuben live and not die out, even though his numbers are few. So that's the translation that SBL has. If you go through other translations, they are sometimes the exact opposite.
Weird how that happens.
I mean, literally, it's like, so it says, even those numbers are few, and then in some translations it says, like, let his numbers be few.
yeah, I have a comment on
yeah.
this.
Yeah,
as well.
it is so funny. We guys, on the show we all of us read different versions, and we were like, this is a direct antithesis to what the other text says. So I'm not actually sure here on what the Hebrew says. I mean, I can check
The Hebrew is
NIV.
mitav.
Mitpav?
Yeah, but the
Mitpav.
problematic
go with
word
the
is
SBL
the word
translation,
before it.
because SBL is
he.
usually pretty good about that, about
Yeah.
possible original
Well,
readings. So
Yeah.
you
You
could say
could
like
read it
the
as
Hebrew, but I'm mostly asking about an original reading, which we don't know. Admittedly, we don't
yeah,
have
the,
like
the
100% access to.
I would like to
The-
point out
sorry.
that the Song of Moses that we read last time, we made a note it was in a different voice than the rest of Deuteronomy, which is fairly universal voice. This also has the potential to be from another source, and I'm seeing a lot of harmonization with the text to date, especially with Joseph, and I want to discuss that with Lawrence when we get there, and with Levi.
So Levi's got something
Several things
missing.
to say about. But
Yeah.
Also,
but
the
yeah,
stuff at the beginning with the Lord coming from Sinai and dawning from Seir, or Seir, I don't know how to pronounce it. He's shown forth from Mount
Seir.
Paran. So those, Kip actually talked about this last week
mhm.
when we're talking about like a Midianite hypothesis, right? This would have been like the general area where Yahweh would have came from. This is like if he was the foreign god that is imposing or encroaching upon this new land, this would have been his original location.
Yeah, in the mountains and the sacred mountains, and that might be part of the reason why we have so many bloody names, Horeb, Sinai, and now apparently Paran. It's yeah, you're getting a lot of, it's like 3 different versions of telephone are going on, and you're supposed to come up with a coherent message at the end. It's really fun and
Right.
totally coherent.
And there's
inevitable.
so many like different variations here. Like in verse 2 there, it's talking about the myriad of holy ones or his own host, but the Septuagint has directly angel or angels. And then they're talking about
Some translate it as a location name as well.
right, and then there is also the issue in verse 3 with the holy ones. So it says, in at least in my translation, in your charge, but they I mean, it kind of means the same thing essentially, but the Septuagint
your
goes with, like
hands.
in your hands. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what the Hebrew says as well. Beyadecha, in your hands.
it says hupotas kerasu. So yeah.
Which could mean that in your hands, or to leave something in someone's hands is
Right,
to leave it
right.
in their charge.
Although
So
the
it's not-
Peshitta, the Peshitta has he has blessed.
Are under your
Mm.
hands. Yeah. Okay. He has blessed.
Oh.
Interesting. And it looks like there's there's a whole bunch of variations too, because like in 33:2, there is also he came from Rehoboth Kadesh, and there's like this entire passage, entire chapter has so many different variations.
Yeah. In the BHQ, McCarthy notes a lot of them, especially in verse 2
Oh yeah.
and 3. There's like a lot of variations happening there.
It's almost like when your holy book is compiled from different eras of a language that changes, and then you're left with different translations as your source material, that could lead to some confusion. But God is not the author of confusion.
I'm
Except
just
when he has
No, the
confused. as to-
Deuteronomist is. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
I'm
We'll get
confused about Reuben. Did he die?
Well, if it's Reuben
Well-
James, he still walks the fertile fields of my mind.
I
Sure,
It would be his lineage,
weathered plow.
too.
I mean, the
Whether
tribe
hands
of
upon
Reuben
the plow.
is not known like as a. I don't think we have like any records of people claiming to be descended from Reuben specifically, much later than like Second Temple period. Like
Okay,
it would have been
well,
one of
either
the
he
10
died-
tribes. Not him. It's
Either he
talking about
died and his
the
prophecy
tribe.
failed,
It's the tribe, not
Or-
the person.
Yeah.
okay, either they died or they lived on as pastrami on rye.
With spicy
Oh, so-
mustard, yes.
So with regard
There are
to that,
worse ways
that
to live
verse,
on.
right? The verse is, may Reuben live and not die, though few be his numbers, right? So that's one translation. And the Hebrew is vihi matav mispar. So you could translate vihi and he will be, and then he will be few in number. But you could also translate it, I guess, as and behold, he is but few in number, which is probably where the though few be his numbers is like the explanation of that. So it's kind of because the word can mean and he will be, or it could also be kind of translated as and then in the future, but not necessarily real future tense, because biblical Hebrew future tense, it doesn't really exist. It's more perfect and imperfect, and you can use this imperfect tense here to imply this.
To imply food.
Yeah, it's like it's imperfect, so it could be read as, and then this will happen, or you could think of it as just an imperfect part of the clause. So yeah.
Oh, good.
I'm going to read a comment from Old Poi. Says, hi, I recently read a study on how religious fundamentalism hijacks the brain. It was interesting and made me think of people like Kent. Have you read this? If so, what are your thoughts? No, I haven't read it, but I've certainly experienced indirectly how religious fundamentalism seems to rot one's brain.
I'd love to know the name of that study, but I have to say I found very interesting on YouTube Theremin Trees videos. He's very good at bringing out the psychological element, how it can be hijacked by various high control groups, and how it fits in very well in the history of religion, which I am actually going to come back to that at one point, because looking at this text, the things it says about the different tribes are very telling. You can see there's some references to previous material in some of the tribes' names, but not in others. And that's why I wanted to ask Lawrence, what is the general, either consensus or top 2-3 opinions on the authorship of this particular state of blessings? Is it a pre-existing Deuteronomy? Is it post? Is it a little bit of a mishmash? What are we doing here?
I mean, it certainly makes a lot of references to like that older stuff that we've read. So if we're talking about like we're gonna see more of this later, but if we're talking about I know, see, as a chapter as a whole, I don't know exactly, but when it comes to from what I'm looking at right now, what we've seen so far, it does seem to be either exilic or post-exilic. You could argue that like maybe there's a pre-exilic layer to it, but because like in my view, the whole Moses myth probably started around the late 8th century. That's not everyone agrees with that, but that's my own view on it.
I have a note by Lundbom about this, the dating of the blessings. He writes, the blessing of Moses, like the Song of Moses, is a poem of independent origin inserted into the final supplement of Deuteronomy. It is not Mosaic, but considerably older than the prose comprising the bulk of Deuteronomy. The blessing is said to have been composed in the 11th century and written down in the 10th century, according to Cross and Friedman. Driver proposed.
Cross and Friedman. Let's just.
Wait, but he goes on. He goes on and says a Driver proposed a 10th century date, perhaps during the reign of Jeroboam I. He said the poem reflected a northern point of view, suggesting as its author a poet who resided in northern Israel. Fithi and Adams argued for an earlier date. His view was cited with approval by Cassuto, but the Cross and Friedman date, which was based on vocabulary, spelling, verse structure, comparisons with Canaanite poetry, and historical presuppositions in the blessings, has one general acceptance. And he cites Albright, Ewright, and Moran.
Oh my God, oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna have so much to say. So I'm preparing something on the Deuteronomistic history, and I'm gonna be discussing the positions of people like Cross and Friedman, and for that matter, people like Albright as well. These ideas I'm not sure. For when in terms of popularity, sure, but the recent scholarship on the Deuteronomistic side has been so leaning heavily against the Cross Friedman schools and the Albright schools. Like and the thing is that kind of criticism started with like people like Noth. So like in the 40s. Now that didn't even gain like general acceptance until like the 50s or 60s, but there's too much here. Like we're gonna see it later about like the safety of Israel and all that. I mean, as an independent work, sure, I could see that, and even hints from the north. But if there are hints from the north, we have to remember that there was a migration from the north to the south during the Assyrian invasion. So even then, that would still be fine for a later dating.
I can see the northern influence though in the part about Judah,
Sure. Yeah.
because the Deuteronomist, is obviously hyping up the reign of Josiah and the reign of Hezekiah as being the only two kings, and they're both in the line of David, and it's all about David, and they'll throw in a little, future prophecy about the kingship of Judah and yada yada yada, everywhere they can. But here, the bit about Judah is incredibly short. Hear, O Lord, the cry of Judah, bring him to his people with his own hands. He defends his cause. Oh, be a help against his foes. Seems to indicate that Judah's tribe was involved in warfare, but that's it. That's not a lot. So that very much I can see coming from a previous thing. But if we come down to Joseph, there's a lot of hints on the story of Joseph that find some reference here. And was that a later, the precious dew from heaven, the, sun and moon, the prince above his brothers, or prince among his brothers that they should bow down to, bull, ox, all very much sounding like references to the Joseph story in Genesis, which you've argued, of course, is a later insertion, which just, much like the sort of popular stories of like Daniel, which makes sense. But then is that a later insertion, or is this the kind of thing that they're referencing off of to create that story? Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll start my commentary. First on verse 1, Moses, the man of God. Weinfeld notes that the term man of God is an innovation about Moses. While the Torah sees him as a prophet, he's explicitly called that only twice, as in 18:9 and 34:10, and he is usually called servant of Yahweh, in Hebrew Oved Yehovah. The term man of God is a hapax in the Torah, but outside of it, it appears 75 times, with 4 speaking of Moses in Joshua 14:6, Psalms 91, 1 Chronicles 23:14, and 2 Chronicles 30:15. He further writes, while the affinity between man of God and prophet is clear, the distinction between the two is not. For example, Elisha is called man of God 29 times, and is portrayed as doing miracles using supernatural powers of his own, and not from the power of divine mission. But other people who are called by this term are portrayed as prophets of Yahweh, who say his words in his guidance, and sometimes their title is replaced by the term prophet. On verse 2, Nelson writes that this verse has not been transmitted correctly, and its Hebrew is difficult. He writes that the word came, ba, indicates the perspective of Israel. Lundbom notes that some scholars argue that Yahweh worshipped is traced back to the Canaanites and Midianites, who lived in the Sinai Peninsula and the Negev. According to this Canaanite hypothesis, Yahwism was introduced to Moses by Jethro/Hobab, who is called a Canaanite in Judges 4:11. Canaanite nomads joined the Israelites in their journey and settled in the Promised Land, as seen in Judges 1:16 and 1 Samuel 27:10, and had good relations with Israel, according to 1 Samuel 15:6. Although extra biblical evidence from Egypt and Kuntilat Ajud have been used to support this theory, it is still contested and many scholars reject it. Now, from the south, from his mountain slopes. In Hebrew, it's mimino ishdat lamo. The term eshdat, not ishdat. Eshdat appears as one word in the Ketiv, but as 2 words, dat and esh, in the Tkherei. While the word esh has usually been understood as fire, the term dat is more problematic. Some, like the Targums, Sifrei Deuteronomy 3:4:3, and Rashi, read dat as law, and thus read fiery law, as seen also by Vogt and Ibn Ezra. However, McCarthy notes that dat is generally taken as a Persian loanword, and its biblical usage is found in later texts, such as Esther, Ezra, and Daniel. Therefore, it is unlikely that the word dat means law here. Septuagint reads angels, interestingly enough. McCarthy writes that it might reflect an ancient tradition whereby angels were seen to be mediators of the law. She also suggested that Septuagint's reading might represent a later emendation of a vorlage which read Asherat, i.e. Asherah, thus representing a theophany which originally would have included Asherah at Yahweh's right. Tigay, however, disputes this, but the Peshitta omits this term.
That would not surprise me given last time and with Dr. Kipp's translation of the song. If they were both taken from older sources, or at least partly taken from older sources, then I would expect there to have been, at least at one point, many polytheistic references. Because, yeah, it was a polytheistic world until, some cult leaders retconned everything. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems to, in verse 5, it seems to like kind of assume this idea of this united monarchy. But the thing is, the evidence of archaeological evidence kind of speaks against the idea of this big grand united monarchy. It's a later propagandistic idea.
it's sort of a sort of a King Arthur vibe, like.
Kind of right. So, but like the thing is, like, I do think there was a historical David, right? And I do think that he had associations with Judah, but the idea that there was this big grand united monarchy of the North and South, like, no, that's a later thing upon
You mean
return.
they idolized a petty warlord and made up big stories about him? Surely that's
Yes,
never happened in the
essentially.
history of the world.
Yes, I believe that's exactly what happened.
No, so unlike people to do that.
I was in.
I'm sure there was a David. I know so many Davids. I don't even call any of them David. I call them all by their nicknames or by their last names.
I was in the I actually was in the British Museum this morning, and they had in the gift shop, as I was walking past, I noticed it. I was like, "What the hell?" They had a book which was like a reprinting, updated version of this old Victorian timeline of the world history. So it's from a long time ago. You might be familiar with the one. It's like very colorful, and it starts at Adam and whatever. And it's so new, this 7th edition, or whatever. It's got the king in it at the end, like King Charles III, whatever. And
Wow.
yeah, but I was like, what? This is
Chucky the
weird. Why did they
Handmaster?
got this here? Whatever. I mean, the disclaimers weren't as big as I would hope, but whatever. I was looking. I noticed that in the English, if I follow the British history line, it goes back till the first king of England, and then it shows the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, which is like the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms before they were united under whatever his name was, whatever. But then it had what's his face, Arthur Pendragon,
Arthur.
like just like before that in like this random area, and I was like, okay,
King whatever and what's his face. That sounds like a book I would read.
Well, I'm sure all the British people in the chat are going to be like ripping me apart for not knowing the name of the first king of England.
How dare you?
What was his
Alfred.
name?
You
It's
did
Alfred the
have a
Great.
lot of
Alfred the Great.
kings.
Alfred the Great
Yeah.
it was really his son, wasn't it? I don't know, whatever.
Oh,
Yeah, Alfred
okay.
the Great, I guess you can count as the first one. And yeah, but then it just had Arthur Pendragon as in a section just before it, like in the vacuum after the Romans leave or whatever, and it's like, okay, I see how people kind of could think of these like people as being like the beginning of their own kingdom, even though they're not connected.
It's almost like every nation mythologizes the dark or less known aspects of their history to make themselves feel better and give themselves a narrative to follow. And noticing this doesn't mean you deserve to go to
I thought so,
hell.
Okay. On verse 3, Tigay comments, the meaning of this verse cannot be determined, and the text may well be damaged. A literal reading might be, quote, even the lover of peoples, all it/his hallowed ones are in your hand, and it is they who tuku at your feet. He bears/utters your pronouncements, end quote. The main difficulty is the unknown verb tuku. The JPS followed is a surmise based on the next word leraglecha, in your steps, as seen in most Telugu translations and Ibn Ezra. Since leraglecha could also mean at your feet, tuku might also mean they bowed. The phrase translated accepting your pronouncements is also problematic, since Hebrew nasa does not normally mean accept. A more likely translation is bearing your pronouncements, in which case this clause wouldn't be comparable to an expression in the Amano letters in which a vassal declares that he bows at the feet of the suzerain and that he carries his suzerain's words on his front and back, meaning that he is constantly attentive to the suzerain's commands. Yet another possible translation is uttering your pronouncements, according to Nachmanides.
The SBL goes with they marched at your heels, accepted direction from you,
Mm.
which does
They-
carry
they-
the kind of Yahweh is an ancient war god thing.
Yeah, it definitely has the more warlord connotations, although given some of the other stuff, the idea of him making them do some sort of special groveling kowtow bow also makes sense.
Yeah, and Targum Onkelos reads, they are conducted under the cloud, led by your word.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, there was one other thing about verse 2 that's interesting. So there is a Jewish tradition that, Sinai, Seir, Paran kind of refer to, not that God came from these places, it's more like God came to Sinai, he came to Seir, which is like where the Edomites are, which is later Jewish tradition is the ancestors of Christians, which is not a tribe, so it's weird, but whatever. And Paran is identified with Ishmael, the ancestor of the Arabs. So there is a kind of idea that from the traditional Jewish perspective, it's just like, he went to them, he asked them if they wanted it, they said no, so then he gave it to the Jews. But so there's I think there is like a later maybe Christian idea of that this is like a showing, or maybe it's a Muslim idea, where it's like, you see, God is like this is a prophecy saying that God is going to come to prophets to the Israelites, to
In
the
these
Edomites,
different
and
groups, that there'll be three of
to
them.
the Ishmaelites. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes more sense as a Muslim one, but I mean, both are their own sort
I
of.
don't know if it might not still, it might be more like there were later Jewish commentators that were saying, there are Muslims who tell me that this is a prophecy of Muhammad, and I will say to them, blah blah blah. It's not. It's just this is the story. But
I wish
like-
the
I don't
Bible
know.
said, and I will say to them, blah blah blah. That would be
Yeah, like
I want to channel P-Town for a moment and just acknowledge the
Oh,
fulfilled
no.
prophecy in the Bible where it talks about data storage.
And the Lord saith unto Steve Jobs,
Praise data.
Oh no.
praise.
like
But
the
it talked about the cloud.
It did.
So Thomas Romer notes this about he thinks that this is part of this is during the Persian period, so this is post-exilic. So in Deuteronomy was cut off from the following books. New chapters were added. The blessing of Moses in Deuteronomy 33, which paralleled him with Jacob, and reinforced the structural and narrative coherence of the Pentateuch. Then he says this also for Deuteronomy 11, 26 to 31, and Deuteronomy 27. They were probably added in order to facilitate the acceptance of the Torah by the religious elite of the province of Samaria.
And this is like the compilation of the Torah in its like current form, obviously, comes post-exilic. It's the returning, all of that. But clearly they must have, whoever wrote this had access to some of the Genesis material, much of which is, pre-existing. It was just compiled into later, into an attempt at coherency. But like the Levi one specifically, it's very clearly talking about how the Levites won the priesthood in the text, which I remind you was by slaughtering every man his brother and every man his friend and every man his neighbor, according to the word of Moses from God, because God got pissy that they made a statue, but didn't punish the man who actually made the statue, because shut up. But it wasn't nepotism, because reasons. But it's clearly that story here. And it's also, which brings me back to the comment we had earlier about the cult mentality, something that you observe in the texts of major religions and minor cults in Christianity, whoever does not hate his father, mother, sister, brother can in no wise be my disciple. And even his own life. The same thing is said of Muhammad. I must be dearer to you than all these things.
Matthew 10 or Matthew 6?
It might
Never
actually
mind.
be both. It's repeated in Matthew.
Okay.
Well, it like with slight variation. But Matthew 6 is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. So no 5. Never mind. I'll have to look it up. I can't memorize the whole Bible. Sorry.
Okay, on verse 4, Nelson comments, Israel becomes the speaker in verse 4. The proclamation of law follows immediately upon the arrival of the divine warrior, perhaps within the context of a national assembly in verse 5. Verse 4 may be a reductional link, tying the poem to the body of Deuteronomy. However, the parallelism between Torah, law, and Morashah, inherited possession, suggests that Torah could refer as instruction to the blessings that follow. Last words can be commanded in 2 Samuel 17:23 and 2 Kings 21.
This verse, by the way, verse 4:33-4, is one of the 12 verses of the Torah that are taught to Jewish children as a sort of like, I don't want to say like memory aid. They they learn it in song form and stuff. They're like considered the 12 verses that are like important. And this is the first one. The second one is the Shema.
Okay. On verse 5, as noted in 32:15, Jeshurun or Yeshurun is a poetic name for Israel, meaning the upright one. Most commentators write that the king here is God. Lundbom writes that before a monarchy was established in Israel, Yahweh was understood to be king, as in Exodus 14:18, Numbers 23:21, and Judges 8:23. This idea was called into question when Israel asked for an earthly king, as other nations had, seen in 1 Samuel 8:7 and 12:12. Saadia Gaon, Ibn Ezra, and Chizkuni took the king to be Moses, and Gersonides identified the king as Saul. On verse 6, the short blessing of Reuben attests to its insignificance, and according to Nelson, reflects its early decline in population and endangered future. In Genesis 49, verses 3-4, Jacob describes Reuben as powerful, quote, exceeding in rank and exceeding in honor, end quote, but due to him sleeping with Bilhah, he is, quote, unstable as water, end quote, and thus, quote, shall excel no longer, end quote. Lundbom writes that after the tribe incurred problems with the Ammonites, it diminished in numbers. The tribe had vanished from the political scene by the 10th century. Afrahat, in Demonstration 8:8, writes that Moses absolved Reuben from his sin of sleeping with Bilhah, so that when his brothers should rise, he might not be cut off from their number.
Yeah,
I got a
that's
question.
another.
I get a question. We have Moses as the king, or we have God as the king. Did I hear all that right?
Depends who you ask.
Yeah.
But most commentators see the king here as God.
Yeah.
God likes to call himself the king, and then once we get through all the repeated genocides of Joshua, we get to Judges, and we get to see how great God is at being king. He just keeps pulling up Judges, and the results are just wonderful. Game of Thrones is positively G-rated in comparison, but okay, maybe just PG, but yeah, it's
the calf period of Israelite history.
Yeah.
And they're
Well,
but
God is supposedly the
king.
king during that time, and
Yeah,
So
everyone
there's
does
no
what's
there's
right in
no
their own
point
eyes.
that this is supposed to be literal. They're not ever talking about a person who was king who was then deified, right?
Well, we get that a little bit later, kind of, with Samuel, because he's not a king, but he is kind of deified in the whole Witch of Endor thing. He's
He does get
called
to come back after
Elohim.
death.
Yeah.
Mm.
So he's
Yeah,
not
but
like a
then
king proper, but
no, but early Elohim is like God or exalted spirit. Like,
right. It gets kind of weird, right? That's a fun little chapter.
In fairness, they could just be stealing language from cultures that did deify certain kings, which was definitely a thing that happened a lot in that part of the world. So you can end up with some literary nudgy overlap. It's not necessarily that they intended it that way. It's just kind of the idioms are what they are.
There is, I mean, from the perspective of those who say that it's referring to Moses, they would have seen it as allegorical, like Moses was like a king to them in the sense that he was like teaching them the law. And I think there's even an idea that it's referring to the Torah itself. The king is the Torah. And when it says in Judges 18, there was no king in Israel, this is like understood to be they had forgotten the Torah, there was no Torah.
Yep, in the period of the judges, there was no king in Israel. Totally means Torah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And
This is
that's why
from
God's so offended
Yehuda
when they
Halevi.
asked for a king, because he was doing such a fucking stand-up job of it.
Okay. Again, I mean the same verse. Nor his people be few. In Hebrew, ve'ehi metav mispar, literally, and let his metav be a number. The word metav is understood to be his men or his people, as seen in 234, 427, and BDB Dictionary. Perhaps there is a play on the word dai, yamot, in the first part of the verse. Yamot, yeah, in the first part of the verse. The Samaritan text reads mi'ito, from him, and from that may there be from him a number, i.e., many. Likewise, the Septuagint reads, let him be many in number. This rendering, however, is unlikely given that this verse is seen as an attempt to preserve the Reubenites from extinction. On verse 7, hear, Lord, the cry of Judah. In Hebrew, it's Shema Yehovah Kol Yehuda. The word kol means voice, but the Targums read it as prayers. And Lundbom comments, this blessing is a prayer that Yahweh will help Judah through some difficulty it is having. The Targums here have the Targums have Yahweh being asked to bring Judah safely home from war, and thus Rashi, in peace after warfare. Judah fared better in the blessing of Jacob in Genesis 49, verses 8 to 12, but not in the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, where it was left out entirely. Some, like Driver and Nelson, imagine that Judah needs divine help in being reunited with Israel, but that presupposes a date for the poem later than the 11th century, after the division of the kingdom. In the 11th century, there is no division between Judah and the rest of Israel.
Yeah, that's another one of those things that's for a long time that was basically just assumed as a given by scholars. They were kind of taking it as more historical than the archaeological evidence speaks for. So, it does get kind of complicated because there is like this idea when it comes to Deuteronomistic scholarship that like the books of like Joshua and Judges are more like not exactly primeval, like they represent like a transitional period between I guess mythologized heroes and like the more historical king's narratives. And they're I forget which scholar did it. I'll have to go back and check. But there was this idea that those three books represented like a more mythological character, and then like the books of Samuel and Kings were more historical narratives, more proper history. And the way that it's kind of viewed, there is a good parallel to this. And I don't think there's necessarily influence, but it's a good parallel just to get the idea. So in Egyptian king lists, I think it's the Turn canon. So the earliest parts, and by earliest I mean like the earlier kings listed, are gods, right? So like Ra, for example, is a pharaoh, right? And then there is this transitional period between gods and the actual historical pharaohs of Egypt that has like spirit kings. So it kind of it to me that's just a good parallel in how to understand that there are these texts where you have mythologized heroes and they're kind of written into the history, because that's kind of how historiography worked back then, and I don't think that's a bad way to view it, perhaps. But I'll get more into it. I forget whose
Yeah, and
hypothesis that was.
quasi-historical
Yeah,
characters were
quasi-historical.
blown up out of all proportion.
Right.
And based on, I mean, there's lots of mythological stories that come about historical characters. Everyone always talks about, George Washington and the cherry tree as a totally made up mythologized story that happened like the year he died. So, you can only imagine with someone like David, who was probably a petty, vindictive warlord and definitely a shit if any of the stories are true. But, you can blow that up beyond all recognition into something that bears very little resemblance to the actual history.
I'm going to read a comment from Herbert Yablonsky, offers $5 and says, I know you like Dragon's Milk beer, Aaron. You try the Origin bourbon? No, I have not. But anyway, sorry about
Have you
that.
tried God's titty milk though?
See, I still don't understand why he would need titties.
I wonder, the land of milk and honey, people talk about it so often. We know where the milk comes from, but what exactly is the honey?
Oh, the honey came from the rocks. The milk came from God's tits. There you go. We solved it all.
Hooray!
We have mentioned it, that the honey is traditionally understood to be date honey.
Oh, and Eric Wanders said, behold the blasphemers, much love to everyone here. And I think we missed him. So I just wanted to say hi, Eric.
Yay, Eric.
Good.
Yay!
Right. Ember?
All right. The thingy back on.
Wait. I'm sorry.
We haven't
I was
finished
muted.
yet. Yeah.
He's not done his
Yeah.
commentary. Okay, I'm getting
Yeah,
That's
what
why
it
I was
says for you.
surprised. I was like, I didn't think we were finished yet.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry. I was muted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
By the way, did anyone notice that Simon, Simeon, whatever, is not mentioned at all?
Yeah, screw that guy.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Rashi says it's because
Sorry.
of Balpaor. But yeah, it's funny that he's just missing.
Okay,
Mm.
on verse again, I'm still on verse 7. With his own hands he defends his cause. In Hebrew, it's yadav ravlo. Literally, his hands are rav to him. According to McCarthy, the word rav is understood by the Masoretic text as either a perfect or participle form of the root resh yud bet, to contend. Septuagint and Peshitta read, his hands will decide or judge for him. The Vulgate reads, his hands shall fight for him. The Targums, let his hand bring calamity upon his enemies. On verse 8, Nelson comments, the blessing of Levi is fashioned as a prayer. It advocates an explicitly Levitical priesthood, perhaps over against rival priestly claimants. Levi has earned its special role through a former act of fidelity that went so far as to deny family connections. Compare Numbers 25 verses 1 through 13 and Ezekiel 44:15 and 48:11. Levi's anti-family position stands in some tension with the emphasis on brotherhood in verses 16 and 24. This perspective on the event at Massa is more similar to that of Psalms 81:8, which is 70 in the Old Testament, than to that of Deuteronomy 6:16. It refers to a tradition having a plot similar to Exodus 32, verses 26 through 29, but not reported in either Exodus 17 or Numbers 20. Wordplay is prominent. You tested at the testing place, Massa, and contended at the site of contention, Meribah. And
But it doesn't mention the golden calf, right?
No.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think I wonder if that's if that's possible a reason why, if that's evidence that this is from an alternative tradition, because it would be quite important, like to be like, oh yeah, the only times you're so faithful, the only times you ever had problems was this tribe is at these places. But what about Aaron creating the golden calf? Like Jewish traditional commentators will Ibn Ezra, is it Ibn Ezra? He's like, oh yeah, this is evidence that he was forgiven. not that this is possibly a alternative tradition, but
I should also note Septuagint 4Q test, which is the Testimonia, and 4Q Deuteronomy H read, give to Levi your Thummim. This reading is preferred by McCarthy and Nelson, with the former writing that it allows a smoother flow of the first two clauses. Lundbom, however, writes that the line reads perfectly well without the addition.
Yeah, the SBL also does say, "Give to Levi your Thummim."
Yeah. On verse 9, Tigay writes that it is unclear if this verse hints to the event at verse 8 or to the golden calf event, where the Levites followed Moses' command and killed all the sinners, including sons, brothers, fellows, and relatives. Exodus 32, verses 27 to 28. Lundbom comments, the priests are said to disregard members of family in order to keep Yahweh's word and observe his covenant. Yahweh's covenant with the priesthood was made when the zealous priest Phinehas punished an Israelite man and a Midianite woman for worshipping Baal of Peor, and in so doing stayed a plague. And in so doing stayed a plague that had claimed 24,000 lives. This covenant ensured permanence to the Aaronic line of priests, seen in Numbers 25, 1-13. The Levites followed the present principle after the golden calf incident in the wilderness. Another application of the principle would be in carrying out Deuteronomy's mandate to punish family members if they are found to have led people in the worship of other gods, as in 30 verses 7 to 12, which in the Old Testament is 6 through 11. On verse 10, he offers incense before you. In Hebrew, it's yasimu ketorah be'apecha. Literally, they shall put incense in your nose or nostrils. The smell of incense is said to enter the nostrils of Yahweh, seen in Genesis 8:21, and compare Leviticus 26:31 and 1 Samuel 26:19. Septuagint, Peshitta, and Vulgate read af in the context of anger, and thus they shall place incense in your wrath. Targum Onkelos, Adegon, and Lundbom read, they shall put incense before you.
It's nice to know that God has nostrils. He needs nostrils because he needs to breathe.
Well, and he needs to smell all the burning flesh that he enjoys so much, and the incense, which not really sure which one of those he prefers.
You also
I
need
think the
you
burning
also need
flesh.
nostrils to snort in indignation.
Hmm?
You need nostrils to snort in indignation.
Mm-hmm.
Very important, yeah.
Huh?
On verse 11, strike down those who rise against him, his foes, till they rise no more. Hebrew Bible reads, smite the loins of his foes, let his enemies rise no more. Nelson writes that this could refer to those who oppose the priestly claims of those with Levitical genealogy, if one takes loins to refer to their procreative powers, seen in 1 Kings 12:10 and Isaiah 48:1. However, loins can also denote strength, and thus verse 11 could speak of Levi as a belligerent secular tribe, compare Genesis 34.
But it sounds like they're just advocating nut shots.
On verse
This is
12,
because I'm eating nuts, right?
I give the best nut jobs.
Oh my.
Oh my.
All right, Mikey's girl 21 or 21050 says, "Do these live streams count as sermons or Bible studies or what?" I'm
Yes.
going to say Bible study. We don't do any sermoning here.
Yeah,
Very
definitely
little,
Bible
I
study.
think.
we sermon the devil.
Yeah.
So
It's
on
only the
verse 12,
second best Bible study on YouTube, though.
Boy.
Yeah, but if this is
Gosh,
this
what's
question,
the
I think it's
verse,
coming-
Lawrence?
This question, I think it's coming from a Christian, and I was wondering if Bible study means something different in that context.
Well, the thing is,
Well-
I wouldn't say that it does, because while Christian Bible studies, of course, have their own focus, they still do kind of like, passage breakdowns, but then it's mostly like intertextual, right?
Right.
It's not like what we're doing here, because we're also comparing other literature of the time, and we're being critical of the text, and that doesn't necessarily mean criticize. We're just reading it critically and through put our thinking caps on to try to figure out how this was compiled, and kind of a lot of reading between the lines, stuff like that. And Christian Bible studies, while they kind of do that, they do it in a very different way then
They have prescripted narratives that exist in order to help you get something spiritual out of the text,
right.
by which they mean ideologically in line with what they want you to think. And also possibly make you feel good, feels in your hearts, which, it helps you believe in God because I had fifis, is always the best argument for, complex realities. But yeah, basically, if you need to get someone off your case by telling them that you're spending your Saturday mornings at a Bible study so they can't, you can go ahead and call it that. This is literally the Blasphemers Bible study. So
Now on verse 12, Tigay comments, the tribe of Benjamin occupied a small but strategic territory between those of Judah and Ephraim, at one time encompassing on its southern border at least part of Jerusalem. Its blessing characterizes the tribe as God's beloved and describes the security it will enjoy. Its belovedness is reminiscent of Jacob's dotting on the tribe's eponymous ancestor Benjamin. See Genesis 42:20. Parts of the blessings may be based on its name Binyamin, literally son of the right. Although right is usually taken to mean south, in Psalms 110:1, sitting on God's right is a sign of favor or protection. Quote, sit at my right hand while I make your enemies your footstool, end quote. The final clause of the blessing, quote, as he rests between Ben, his shoulders, end quote, may have been inspired by the first syllable of Benjamin.
Yeah,
On that
there's
same
a little
page.
interesting thing here about the ending of the verse where it says, "And he rests between God's shoulders." So apparently, there's a story that when David was going to build the temple, he was like, "Oh, I should put it up on the highest place in Jerusalem." And then I don't know who it says told him, but they
Rashi.
were like, "No, no, who?"
That's Rashi saying that.
Yeah, it's Rashi, but I don't know who told David not to. And they were like, no, 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 you should put it on the second highest place because it says in this verse between his shoulders, and the shoulders is not the highest, it's it's lower than the head. So that's why the temple isn't on the highest mountain.
it's kind of funny because in the Joseph story, Benjamin is a kid most of the time. And, he's the last of his mother's children. And, his dad has a real soft spot for him and all that.
Mm.
But between his shoulders just makes it sound like God's giving him a piggyback ride.
Well, he's the youngest, so I guess the
Yeah.
imagery
Well, I have a comment on this as well. So the one
Oh,
the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. The Hebrew Bible reads, he rests between his shoulders. Targums, Rashi, and Tigay take this as referring to God's sanctuary being in Benjamin's territory. Lundbom writes that this would suit an 11th century date for the poem, before the Jerusalem temple was built. Tigay also suggested that taking shoulders here literally, as on or behind his back, seen in 1 Samuel 17:6 and compare Mishnah Makot 3:10. That would mean that God is guarding Benjamin from behind, from Benjamin's blind spot.
But Kitty!
oh.
He's just trying to eat my book.
Oh, he's so cute. And he loves you so much. He's so cute.
Yeah, I wonder if it also refers to the idea that Benjamin is landlocked and so surrounded and protected by the other tribes.
I mean, that could make sense. But if I recall correctly, because of course they had this a retcon about how Reuben was the eldest, so he should have been, the leader of the tribe, but he wasn't. It got passed down to Judah because Reuben fucked his dad's concubine, and Simeon and Levi genocided a town behind their dad's back. And so, everything gets knocked down to the fourth son. But then, if I recall correctly, King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, the youngest, and David from the tribe of Judah. And Judah and Benjamin are the two which are supposed to have stuck together in the southern kingdom after the break that Totes for Real happened. So it's a bit interesting about it's not just trying to fuse the history of two groups together, the northern Israel and the southern Judah, and make it all one happy family, but there's a lot of disparate bits that you're trying to kind of keep everyone happy on. It's very interesting.
Oh, I should note that Lundbom writes that this earlier time, the boundary between Benjamin and Judah ran south of the shoulder of Jerusalem, Joshua 15:8 and 18:16, where Jerusalem is taken to mean the side of the mountain. Okay, so 13 through 17. The blessing of Joseph is the longest and most elaborate of the blessings. It gives him both economic prosperity and military strength. Lundbom writes that Joseph's primacy points to a time when his tribe was the most powerful in Israel, particularly Ephraim. He suggests that the poem may emanate from an Ephraimite in the north.
Or it could
And then
be...
just changing the name to Joseph later on.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe it's because it's two separate tribes and then retconned to be the sons of Joseph.
Yeah, Ephraim and Manasseh, but there's no mention of Ephraim or Manasseh here, just Joseph, which means, I think it means that at the very
are at the
least it was edited.
The other way around, yeah, you're right. Right. Yeah, so it's about, okay. But maybe it was added on when they added in the bit at the end that says, these are the myriads of Ephraim, these are the thousands of Manasseh.
Actually, I'd like to ask Lawrence, because my impression from the text has always been that Ephraim and Manasseh were the older tribes. And the story of Joseph, retconning Joseph in and putting both of them under his umbrella, so you'd still have 12 sons and 12 tribes, but also not, but sort of kind of, was that was a bit of a later add-on, which again, trying to figure out exactly when who fucked with what part of the text is a wonderful pastime. It's very involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole Joseph story itself comes later, right? Like either late Persian, early Hellenistic. So
the written one, sure, absolutely.
It's hard to say if there was some Joseph tradition first, but this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Davidic stuff, right? Because at the end here it says, "Such are the myriads of Ephraim, such are the thousands of Manasseh." There's a very common Deuteronomistic phrase. It's Saul had his thousands, David had his tens of thousands, and that it kind of reminds me of that. And I feel like since it's not that, it might just be like a play on that. So maybe this maybe we have here these initial tribes, being northern ones, being praised first or getting their blessings first, and then later on there was this addition of these other two tribes, perhaps.
And that
by the time that Joseph would have already been associated with them.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that then argues, as I was hinting before, at a very not a single period of authorship for this text, unlike the bulk of the previous song, that this would have been put together at various times, or at the very least certain sections of it highly re-edited, which I find odd because of the the minuscule mention of Judah.
Right. Yeah. Also, yeah. Sorry, my cat is messing around with everything here.
Cats are blanket permission for anything. Always.
Don't you have any professionalism? You can control your animals.
Don't you know how to go fuck yourself?
The idea of Aaron telling us to control animals. How many snakes do you have now, sir?
I think 78.
The snakes aren't the problem.
It's
no. It's
the 5 dogs. There are 5 dogs now. Anyway, Charlie Maloney says, "When did the tribes of Israel stop being a thing? As far as I know, it's purely religious now. Or do people still track their ancestry that far back today?"
Well, some Jews do, like the Ethiopian Jews, like, for example, trace their ancestors to Dan's tribe, and the Cochin Jews, I think, also through, I think, Manasseh, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know if they're tracking it or if it's just a tradition passed down. Like
I think it may be a tradition.
These the what did you call the one? The Bnei Menashe, the
Cochin.
Cochin?
Yeah,
the Cochin Jews.
Tradition.
Yeah, I think they were known as Bnei Menashe, so they kind of, but we don't necessarily know if they don't have a line of descendants, but there are people, more or less, if you have
the Bnei Manasseh is from Myanmar. That's not Cochin.
From where?
Myanmar. Burma.
Myanmar?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
is it is it B'nai something else?
Yeah. Is it
The
something
ones
else?
from Cochin. Yeah. Whatever.
I,
So yeah, I
think
think these are
sort
more
of
traditions. I think if you want to talk about tracking, like more or less, there are certain people in Jewish history that were like, oh, here is my son by son descendants from this other person, and that person, has a descendant from someone else. So if you're descended from Rashi, then you're descended from this other person who's descended from David. So then you could track yourself all the way back to Adam if you wanted to, using the traditional lineages. And then if you're descended from them, actually I don't know if Rashi's from, but like there's a few like if you know that your family comes from the Maharal of Prague or Rashi or the Rambam, those people know where they came from, so you can then claim where you're from. But nowadays it's mostly, as you said, it's more religious. It's like if you're from the tribe of Levi, then there's some things that you do as a Levite that are different.
I have heard
Obviously
there are
priests.
some
Yeah,
genetic markers that can be lined up with people ancestrally from the tribe of Levi specifically because they were.
I think it's only Cohen rather than
Oh,
the
okay.
whole tribe. I think there is
Oh,
some I think there's even like a gene or something that's been attributed to like like almost anyone with anyone who claims to be a Cohen. If you were to do the blood test, they would be more closely related to each other or something like that. But
correct me if
I don't
I'm
know. But
wrong,
there's
but as
also
I
like the Lemba
understand
tribe.
it, once Rome came in 70 CE and just blitzed everything and burned Jerusalem to rubble and took prisoner and just decimated everything. I believe at that point, people who had managed to track their tribes basically would have lost that ability. They would have tried in as much as it was possible to marry other Jews, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't really, and lots of people died and lots of people lost track of what was going on. So while you might have specific people who managed to keep a tradition alive, you definitely would not have, I must marry another person from the tribe of Dan.
Right. Yeah.
That's not
That
feasible. You're
that
just trying not to die at this point and possibly not to marry someone who will kill you for your religious proclivities.
Yeah, I think that not marrying people from your tribe probably was never really like a strong thing.
It
So I don't
comes
think
up
there
in
was a tribal period.
certain narratives where there's a hint of marrying someone from the right tribe or close enough relation but not too close kind of a thing.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a minor plot point and a few things are kind of hinted at, but it's not 100%. But it would be a lot harder to track after the diaspora.
I mean, is there archaeological proof of the idea of the tribes being these independent entities that existed and then joined together to become this kingdom, or are the tribes a later in like,
I mean,
I think the idea of them being the sons of Israel
Yeah.
literally is a
Yeah.
later addition. But certainly there would have been provinces and areas with certain ways of life that we see reflected in the text.
yeah,
Zebulun and
I would
Naphtali.
think that the biggest difference would be like, kind of what they did or what they harvested, that kind of stuff. But that is like for a good part location based.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
it may
hard
have
to say if they made that same kind of
both provinces or
delineation.
tribes kind of vibe. There's a lot of overlap there in the early.
Yeah, I think the tribes in around the world in the Middle East like continued on until like the early modern period. So like tribes would go and come, like move around and all the time. So it's possible that at some point they were like, oh, these are the 12 tribes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 13. And the precious dew from heaven above. In Hebrew, it's mimeged shemaim. Mimeged shemaim mital, bounty of dew from heaven. The reading of the NIV follows Targum Onkelos and some Hebrew manuscripts, reading me'al instead of metal. This reading corresponds to Genesis 49:25. Tigay writes that the Masoretic text reading makes the word order awkward, and above is a more natural parallel to below in the next clause. This emendation, however, is rejected by Lundbom and Nelson. On that same verse, the deep waters that lie below, Lundbom comments, The deep, in Hebrew tehom, is the subterranean waters cited in Genesis 1:2, which in ancient mythology is personified, for example, the Babylonian Tiamat. Since the verb rovetzet means lying stretched out or couching, as in compare 49:9 and Genesis 49 verses 9, 14, and 25, some commentators and some modern versions like KJV and JPS suggest personification here. But the verb and noun no more than suggest, which is what tehom does in Genesis 1:2. Ancient
Aaron,
mythology.
get back here. We're talking about the world as a snow globe in the ocean again.
Ancient mythology is definitely ancient mythology is definitely in the background, but better sense is made both here and in Genesis 49:25 if the water is simply said to be lying or stretching out beneath the earth, where reference is to wells and underground springs. Septuagint has "and from the abysses of springs below." Abundant water from springs and underground waters, in Hebrew tehomot, is promised in the good land Israel is about to enter, Deuteronomy 8:7. A better case for personification can be made from the quasi-independent power of the curses in Deuteronomy 29:19, which is 20 in the Old Testament, said to be lying stretched out in readiness to attack the idolater.
Yeah.
I swear,
Rashi's-
Water's
Rashi-
deep.
this cat's gonna give me a fucking aneurysm. I fucking swear.
You love it.
Yeah, Rashi has a little quote here that's interesting. Why does it say about Joseph that the deep that couches below his land or whatever? Like, how does that help anyone? For the deep ascended and moistened it from below. You will find that in the case of each tribe. Okay, whatever, that's fine.
That actually tracks with the dew from heaven thing, because it is in, at least once it's referenced this idea that it never rained before the flood and things were watered by a mist or a dew from below. So it's the waters of the deep that came up as opposed to the waters above that came down. But the personification with Tiamat is, or like the hint of that, obviously it's not
Yeah, it's right.
explicit, but it's definitely there in the language. Yeah.
I mean, but in
interesting.
English we have idioms like that where we talk about certain things where we personify emotions and stuff without implying. Maybe it comes from, maybe the language is descended from a time of
Well, and you would
polytheistic
expect
ideas,
that,
but
yeah, you expect myths to be reflected in language, even if people aren't always necessarily conscious of them. How many idioms in modern language come from the, King James version of the Bible or Shakespeare, and nobody knows the origin? Half the people who use it don't know the origin, at least.
So you're saying like
You see that
all
with
of these,
Tolkien even. Not
all
all
the
things are
Indo-European
lost.
languages. So like English talking about love in such a like personified way is descended from like Cupid and Eros or whatever being possibly. And it's not like those ideas, especially the classical ideas, weren't revived and kept alive even despite Christianity.
Oh yeah, I mean, you'd have lots of, Jehovah and Jove crossways and oratorio and things like that, references, and yeah, people like older myths because they're classier.
Okay, verse 14, the finest the moon can yield. In Hebrew, mimeged geresh yerachim, literally from the bounteous crop of the moons in plural. The word yerachim could be understood as moons, while the Peshitta just read moon in the singular. It could also be read as month, as seen in most early translations, Nelson and Lundbom. Nelson suggested that this may refer to different crops ripening in different months, or to a putative influence of lunar phases on plant growth. Rashi writes that some fruits are ripened by the moon, such as cucumbers and melons. Tigay notes, yes, and Tigay notes that this viewpoint is attested in earlier sources such as Apuleius in Metamorphosis 11:2 and in a Sumero-Akkadian hymn to the moon god, in at page 386.
I think it's technically possible to photosynthesize from moonlight, but it's not it's not worth it. So
Yeah, it's
most
not.
plants
It's
like go to
completely
sleep.
Slightly
inefficient.
worth it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
inefficient,
the
right? It's inefficient, so they go to
efficiency,
sleep instead, kind of.
Yeah, I'm
They're not
inclined to go with the
sleeping.
first idea because we still say that, although it's archaic language today. We do say, "I haven't seen you in many, many moons," or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
well,
do.
the word
Although
month comes from the word moon.
it still reminds me of the Joseph having the dream of the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars that bow down to him, or 10 stars. I don't know if Benjamin was included in that. I can't remember. But yeah, Tsunami just said, so Sailor Moon, fighting evil by moonlight.
Sailor Moon
Sorry.
does bring all the best gifts.
Well, and yeah, that's still better than Jehovah. So
On verse 15, the wealth from the mountains and hills is also found in Genesis 49:26, quote, to the utmost bounds of the eternal hills, end quote. Lundbom writes that the mountains and hills provide various sources, such as grain, wood, stone, copper, etc. Half of Manasseh's tribe resided in the highlands of Bashan and northern Gilead, which were ideal for agriculture and pasturing. Such imagery is attested in Epic of Gilgamesh 6:17, quote, the yield of hills and plain they shall bring thee as tribute.
Wait, where is good for pastry?
Pasturing, sorry.
Oh.
France.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that makes sense. I was like, ooh.
No,
okay.
was it Danish?
On verse 17, a firstborn bull. Although Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, Joseph received Reuben's birthright in 1 Chronicles 5 verses 1 through 2. Joseph was also the firstborn of Rachel. Since the Hebrew reads the firstling of his bull, in Hebrew Bechor Shoro, Tigay wrote that the bull refers to Ephraim, being the firstborn of Joseph. Nelson wrote that it refers to God. Lundbom and Weinfeld rejects both views and wrote that this refers to Joseph. Similarly, Septuagint, Semantotext, and Vulgate read firstborn of a bull.
It's also
Don't
the name
you
of one of
love
your
how-
commentators.
Yeah, Bechosho. That's where his name comes from.
Don't you
Well-
love how clear God is in his word?
I mean, he's called that because he wrote a book called that, or that's
No, I
right?
think that's
Actual
I
name?
don't know if that was a nickname or I don't
There
think
are
he
a
has
lot of it is common to call commentators by the name of their book sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, so horns of a wild ox. In Hebrew, it's karnei re'em. The re'em is generally understood to be a wild ox, as in the Peshitta, BDB Dictionary, and modern commentators. The Septuagint, followed by KJV, reads unicorn. In Hebrew, not Hebrew, in the Greek, monokerotos, and the Vulgate, rhinoceros.
Oh wait, hold on. Didn't we talk about this in the Discord for a little
We
bit?
did a long, I think a month or two ago.
Yeah, and I think the Re'em and the
I
Behemoth
completely
get
forgot what I said on
convoluted
that.
a lot as well. Yeah, as far as I grew up, like the Re'em and the Behemoth were seen as the same thing.
Yeah, and the Latin name of the Indian rhino is Rhinoceros unicornus. Read that way, Job makes a lot more sense.
It takes a lot to make Job make sense.
Yeah.
Well, the mythical unicorn, usually a diminutive horse, right? It's usually like not as big as a regular horse, but it's a smaller little thing with the single horn.
It's a goat.
Yeah, I think the original was a
description
goat.
that Job gives talks about a mighty, untamable beast. And rhinos are not only like the second largest land mammal, but they're also pretty dumb. So
Yeah, but I wouldn't fuck with a rhino. I mean, they might not be quite as
exactly,
deadly
but neither would you
but-
do as Job suggests, and have it plow your field. Now, can you do that with cattle? Yeah, you can do that with any type of bovid. You can do that, but not a rhino.
The
Or
mighty
actually be hard as
untamable
well.
beast is what Lawrence is showing on screen right now.
Yeah, don't you mean any kind of bovid? Anyways,
Oh,
this cat
boo.
is fucking crazy. First of all, he eats like everything, even things that we're not sure if he can eat. Like he loves caviar apparently,
Nice.
but I don't know if cats are allowed to have that.
And is
Why not?
untamable,
Dude, I
apparently.
don't fucking know. All
So
right,
much more
I just-
elegant
fish
than my
eggs.
menagerie. My dogs like to go under the parrot's cage and eat bird shit.
Well, I guess that is yeah, this one's a bit pickier than bird shit. So
Mhm.
Lawrence, he's an orange cat, and orange cats are all insane. Also, they share one brain cell. So I don't know if it's his day with the brain cell, but I'm guessing not.
Yeah,
Quantum
they
entanglement.
they don't only eat lasagna, you know.
oh yeah.
What?
Okay. Okay, on verse 18, the heading of the blessing refers to Zebulun, but the blessing includes Issachar as well. Rashi takes the relationship between Zebulun and Issachar as a partnership. Quote, Zebulun departs to engage in maritime trade, gain profit, and provide subsistence for Issachar, while they remained occupied with Torah study, end quote. Nelson writes that the blessings portrays the comfortable situation of these tribes before the onset of the Assyrian rule. The reference to going out and tents may refer to tribal life, with Tigay writing that Issachar's tents refer to herding of sheep. Compare Genesis 49:14. Ibn Ezra suggested that Zebulun's going out may refer to war travels based on Zebulun's military activity.
Yeah, yeah. The tradition I grew up with is the Zebulon would go out on the seas to trade or to trade in general, and Issachar would dwell in tents learning, and one tribe would support the other.
Yeah.
But yeah,
On verse 19, they will summon people to the mountain. The Hebrew it's Amim ha Yikra'u. Commentators know the difficulty of this clause, which literally reads, People's mountain shall call. It is not clear who the people are and what mountain is referred to. Nelson proposed that peoples refer to other Israelite tribes who congregate at the holy mountain of Zebulun and Issachar, and thus refers to the border shrine of Mount Tabor, seen in Joshua 19 verses 12 and 22, Judges 4, 6 and 12, and Hosea 5, 1. Tigay proposed that since Zebulun is located near the seashore, the people might be Phoenician, Egyptians, or other ethnic groups from the Mediterranean islands or lands to its coasts. To its coast. He writes that the mountain could refer to Mount Carmel, where the ruined altar of Yahweh resided, which Elijah repaired in 1 Kings 18:30. Septuagint reads, They shall utterly destroy nations. McCarthy writes that this reading is puzzling and proposes that it must have had a different verlage for the first colon, perhaps reading Cherem instead of Hal, maybe.
And what was this place? Issachar?
The name Issachar
Issachar.
is
Issachar, yeah.
Hal in Hebrew.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
always pronounced
that's
it
where the
Issachar.
orcs took the hobbits.
in Hebrew the second, I think I'm not sure the second
No, that
scene
was Rivendell.
is silent.
Yeah,
So you don't
although
actually
the-
pronounce it.
Isengard.
Or in Ladris.
although Israel say Yisachal.
No,
They-
I'm almost sure it's
Yeah,
silent.
No. Yeah, it is silent, but many Israelis do say Yisachal because they see it
But-
second. Yeah, I know.
But it's Yizachar. That's it. There's no.
I know.
Really?
No, yes, many Israelis say Yisachal.
Well, they are
Yeah,
liberal,
yeah,
secular,
secular. Yeah,
apostates,
of course.
but ignorant of the Bible.
Yeah. And my final comment on this section on the treasures hidden in the sand. The reference is to sand for glass making, as in Deuteronomy 3:5-4 and Rashi, or to shells and murex snails that wash up on the sand, according to Tigay and Nelson. Lundbom notes that classical writers highly praised the sandy beach near Acre, which contained fine sand for manufacturing glass. He also notes that along the coast was a thriving industry of harvesting sea snails, from which costly purple dye was extracted.
Yes, that's been a, that wasn't always with Israel either. That was with was it Tyre and Sidon did that?
Yeah. Acre, Tyre, and Sidon would have been the centers of the murex trade.
Yeah,
But I think there were points in history where they would have been under Israelite control.
Okay, fair enough. Though they obviously made more bank off it historically.
Yeah, and that's why
Yeah.
purple was like color of royalty, because it was very expensive to produce.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's it from a commentary on this part.
All right. Eric Wander gifted 5 R and Raw memberships. Trevorn Wright says in Deuteronomy 33, is Israel never immune from diseases and conflicts? If God was moral, wouldn't you expect him to improve the situation for his people? But instead, he doesn't do it.
Yeah, throughout all Deuteronomistic, like a very common Deuteronomistic theme, I guess the main one is really kind of God's vengeance against Israel for not worshiping him properly. So they justify the exile through that, but then also later on, they use that same narrative to justify the return because that was bad that God sent the Babylonians to exile them, and that was bad for the Babylonians to do that, even though God told them to. It's very copious.
It's like I said last time. It's these people made me angry. We made you do things that made me angry, so I have to kill you. But don't worry, after I kill you, I'll kill the people who killed in vengeance, and then everything will be fair.
Yeah.
As far as the promising good and never coming, which is very much what happens, it's a narcissistic abuse tactic, probably best known as jam tomorrow. You see, the future will come when God will make everything right. Unfortunately, now he has to make up for your fuck-ups by torturing you, but eventually, tomorrow, and then when tomorrow comes, there's another reason that you fucked up and you can't have the good things now, but you'll get jammed tomorrow.
Gotcha. Rachel Light says, I've seen some people refer to the narwhal as the biblical unicorn. I'm not kidding either. Never understood where they got that. It's been years ago when I saw that, though.
I had a guest on my show who claimed that very thing. So it's not uncommon.
Where would biblical authors see narwhals?
They don't,
I mean, it is
but silly apologists do.
Archaeodactyl.
On one of the many excursions that these rabbinical tribes took to Greenland.
I mean, the narwhal is an archaeodactyl, so.
I mean, they would have been.
It's closer than it's closer than a rhino, I guess.
Was this trip to Iceland before or after they established the Lamanites in the New World?
I think they may have come up with it because there are people who have narwhal horns and claim that is an original unicorn horn because it's basically the same shape.
Yeah.
And so
just a quick question. I just want to understand, did we really just spend an hour and a half to read 19 verses?
Yes. It's your fault.
Is this your first day here?
I'm having fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Ember?
All right.
About Gad, he said, this is verse 20, by the way, blessed is he who enlarges Gad's domain. Gad lives there like a lion tearing at arm or head. He chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. About Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan. About Naphtali, he said, Naphtali is abounding with the favor of the Lord and is full of his blessing. He will inherit southward to the lake. About Asher, he said, most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides across the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you, saying, destroy them. So Israel will live in safety. Jacob will dwell secure in a land of grain and new wine, where the heavens drop dew. Blessed are you, Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper, and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will tread on their heights.
Okay, so Jeshurun, who
Who
rides through
the
the
fuck
heavens,
is Jeshurun?
Jeshurun is the poetic name for Israel.
Yeah, it means
who
the
rides
upright
through the
one.
heavens.
The upright one. I just said that. You never listen. Yeah.
It's all Hebrew to me.
Hey, one
Well, it's
question, guys.
Yeshurun technically, but you know,
Yeah.
English
Who-
people don't know how to pronounce.
I
words
can't
correctly.
pronounce things. I am bad
Wait,
at my job.
so hold on, who's Jeshurun?
Well,
Lawrence.
for P-Town would say that Jesus' real name was Yeshua, so Yeshurun, that's referencing Jesus
Oh,
right there.
you just wait for
and
Joshua.
he comes through the heavens, just like he
Running.
prophesied.
Yeah, Yeshua ran
Oh.
through the heavens.
Oh,
Now,
you
shouldn't
just
he be riding a horse with a tongue coming out, his sword coming out of his mouth?
yeah, you just wait for Joshua because the Christians love comparing Joshua to Jesus because of the names.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's not even just because of the names, right? Because like, I mean, Jesus, the story that we get throughout the Gospels, he's supposed to like mimic a bunch of ancient heroes, right? So he's supposed to mimic Joshua in many cases, or Jeremiah or Moses. Like he's supposed to like be, or at least yeah, he's written very much like that, like that he is the epitome of all their great characteristics. So like,
Fulfillment.
yeah, it's just like the name, yeah, absolutely. Which was in the first century pretty common. Yeshua, a very common name. So it's not like you wouldn't, which is I think like the
It means the
equivalent is
Lord
Joshua.
saves, and people wanted to be saved from occupation, so they named every other child that.
It was just easy to say because you just automatically say it whenever you sneeze.
I thought that was Yahweh. Oh no, that was when you breathe.
Eric
Okay.
Wander says, Tomer, is there any commentary for the God of Yeshurun? It seems like God has many names, or is the God of this and that? What do we know about Jeshurun?
I just said that.
Don't you listen?
Yeah. Jeshurun means the upright one. That's just a poetic name for Israel.
Yeah, it's not a slur.
Sure, he asked the question before you gave the answer, but we have to read the. But yeah, it's.
Yeah.
That was a joke, by the way, about straight isn't a slur. This isn't a slur.
Oh yeah. I followed.
Okay, on verses 20 to 21, Nelson comments, for a tribe as peripheral as God, the length and complexity of this blessing is surprising. It comprises a wish, a comparison to a lion illustrating aggressiveness, a reference to prestigious territory, and a mysterious allusion to tribal governance. The wish in verse 21 is an indirect blessing on one, perhaps Yahweh, who champions God's expansion. Verse 21 is problematic in several ways, and translations vary widely. Perhaps portion of a chieftain, mechokek, signifies land so superb that it would even do for a ruler. However, because chet kuf kuf can mean decree or engrave laws in stone, this is sometimes understood as signifying the region of Moses' burial place in Reuben, Joshua 13:20. If this is indeed a reference to Moses, then perhaps verse 21 alludes to his act of lawgiving and to verses 4 through 5. In this case, verses 4 through 5 and 21 could function as a refrain or antiphon. This possibility is reinforced by the repetition of at both places of heads of the people and gathered together.
Had more information on the actual history of the power plays between the tribes, we would have a date for when this was written, because specifically what it says about Gad, the lion, the leader, heads of the people, carrying out judgments, these are all things that most of the time are said about Judah, explicitly those words. And that is because most of the eras of revision, or most of the times when these bits have been put together or revised or edited in any way, have been by people with justifying the ascendancy of Judah from the southern kingdom and justifying the kingship through the line of David, which again is of Judah. It is very odd that it would be Gad that these things would be said about. But then, if we actually knew the history of the power plays, that would probably give us the date for the authorship of this.
Mhm.
It,
On
it could
verse
have been
20
moved, no? Is it possible the verse could have just been moved from somewhere else, and it was referring to a different tribe, and it just got moved?
That is
Yeah.
entirely possible.
It is, but like if it was going to be moved by someone who was editing this, it would have almost certainly been moved to Judah and switched them out with what they said about Gad with
Right.
Judah.
Actually, Judah's quite minimalist as it is already.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Which is
the Ju-
part of the reason
yeah.
for northern.
Yeah, I mean, it seems with the Jewish tradition about this is like, oh, Gad was like super powerful in militarily, and they, chose a portion by themselves. So we're like, oh, we'll just take a portion right now. We'll come and fight, come back,
Mm-hmm.
But then so did Reuben and half of Manasseh. So
Now on verse 22, springing out of Bashan, Lundbom comments, Bashan presumably had lions, since they had mentioned in Song of Songs 4:8 as residing in the vicinity of Mount Hermon. Dan was originally given territory in the Shephelah, west of Benjamin and southeast of Ephraim, seen in Joshua 19 verses 40 to 48. Samson's family came from Tzoah in Judges 13:2. And Samson was later associated with the cities of Eshtaol and Timnah in Judges 13:25 and 14:1. But Dan soon lost his inheritance, not only to the Philistines, who just then were settling along the coast to the south, but also to the Amorites, i.e. Canaanites, according to Judges 1 verses 34 to 35. The tribe then migrated north to the Galilee, where they proceeded to destroy the city of Leshem, i.e. Laish, at the foot of Mount Hermon, and settled there, renaming it Dan in Judges 18. The city of Dan lay close to Bashan, which may explain the lion of Bashan imagery used here. The tribe was henceforth associated with the northern city of Dan. And I think Ambrose, I have a comment by Ambrose. He writes, Moses blessed this tribe, saying, Dan is a lion's whelp, and he shall flee away from Bashan, that is, from confusion. For this reason, we ought rather to interpret according to the Greek, from which our translation comes, that Dan himself became a serpent sitting in the way. Dan expounds judgment, and therefore that tribe has entered into a severe danger of judgment. For the serpent, the Antichrist, has slipped into it to injure it with his poisons as it runs.
Oh, classic.
So Dan's getting uppity, and somebody's pissed about it.
And they've got lions. You got to be careful about where you throw away your your chicken bones and stuff like that, because you want lions. That's how you get lions.
Well, that's how the 3 million people would have been overcome by the beasts of the field if they came in all at once. It was all the lions.
We got lions again, and we just sprayed for these things.
Right.
On verse 23, Weinfeld comments, this short blessing to Naphtali includes a characteristic of its general state and hints to its spreading, inherit in Hebrew Yerashah. The blessing to Naphtali fits its dwelling place at the Galil Mountains, whose climate is favorable and abundant with rains and springs. The end of the blessing is unclear. Yerashah is a hapax form of a verb or noun from the root yud resh shin. Rashi interpreted it as an imperative, as in, quote, go up and occupy, ale rash, end quote, in Deuteronomy 1:21. However, this kind of imperative does not fit with the blessing of Moses. It could be that Yerashah is not a verb, but a name which the letter Taf was removed from, and thus should read Yerashto, his inheritance. The meaning of Yam Vedarom, translated in NIV as southward to the lake, is also unclear. Some say that Yam refers to the Sea of Galilee. Thus, Naphtali's territory was at first located in the east of the Upper Galilee Mountains, and later it expanded southward to the northeast of Lower Galilee, which included the coast of the Sea of Galilee. End quote. And Tigay and Nelson take Yam as west and render Yam V'Darom as west and south he will inherit.
Which is the opposite of where the traditional place is. Normally people, Naphtali in the northeast, not the southwest. But
Mm-hmm.
south towards the lake or is, I guess, makes a bit more sense.
On verse 24, let him bathe his feet in oil. This statement is generally taken to be a hyperbole. Tigay notes that the Galilee mountains were famous for the olive oil which were produced there, seen in Sifrei Deuteronomy 3:5-5, Rashi, and Bechor Shor. Nelson suggested that the image may express general prosperity, seen in Genesis 49:11 and Job 29:6. Targum Onkelos reads, and be nourished with the delicacies of kings, based on Genesis 49:20.
Well, if you get oil all over your feet and then you go walk around these dusty lands, you're just going to have stuff stuck on your feet all the time. I don't get this. Why do people want oily feet?
That's a metaphor, Aaron. It's a hyperbole.
No such thing in the Bible.
No, of course not. And in poetry, of course not. On verse 25, the bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze. The reading bolts of your gates is derived from min alecha, which is a hapax. Sifrei Deuteronomy 3:5-5, Rashi, and modern commentators understood min alecha as lock or bolt, based on the root nun ein lamed, to bolt. Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta read his sandal or shoe, taking min alecha without the mem prefix to read na'alecha. This reading is found in the KJV. Based on this, Paterius writes, Moses says this with regard to the Holy Church. Shoe in Holy Scripture means the office of preaching, as is written in Ephesians 6:15, quote, feet have been shod in preparation for the gospel of peace, end quote. Since iron means virtue and bronze means perseverance, a man's shoes are said to be iron and bronze when his preaching is strengthened with incisiveness and persistence. With iron, he penetrates opposing evils, and with bronze, he preserves the good he had patiently proposed.
So somebody in the chat said that oily feet is a top search result on some sites. And then somebody replied, OMG, it really is.
Oh, in fairness, and in the stories of Jesus, yay, Paytown, you got this one. It is made clear that an element of hospitality is to wash and oil feet, because you could bathe everything before you went to visit, but your feet were going to get freaking dusty and gross and dry in the desert. So when you arrive where you are you would wash your feet and moisturize with a certain amount of oil, and maybe it was scented if you were very fancy and rich and special.
I was gonna say, like, there's a word for it, right, where you like put oil on your body, and like it was very normal as part of like the washing process.
Anointing, if you want to be sacred about it.
Yeah, people like anoint the blood, oil, and isn't there like a story in the Bible where someone is like a girl is like,
yes,
her whole body is anointed in one
woman who anoints Jesus' feet. And
it's a different story where this girl dies because her father anointed her whole body in one go instead of doing, one limb at a time, so that she was like too hot, overheated.
I'm not familiar with that one. That might be a Jewish.
Is it not in the Bible?
Additional.
Maybe it's in the Talmud actually. Yeah,
it could be a Talmud one.
I should note that Ambrose writes about the let him dip his foot in oil. With this oil, the church anoints the necks of its children so that they might take up the yoke of Christ. With this oil, it anointed the martyrs so that it might wash them clean of worldly filth. With this oil, it anointed the confessors so that they might not cease to labor nor succumb to fatigue, so that they might not be overcome by the commotion of this world. For that reason, it anointed them so that spiritual oil might refresh them.
I don't know what oil he was smoking, but
magic. Oil is still used in Christian magic. Evangelicals will use it to anoint their cars so that they'll be safe when they'll anoint their houses for protection. They'll anoint their workplaces to cast out Satan.
Who needs a seatbelt when you got oil?
Yeah, well, it's just you just want a little God on your side, so you do your Christian magic and make a cross
If
with a
you were
whale
loyal,
on things and speak the magic words of
And let Jesus
invoking the
take the
blood of
wheel.
Christ. And hopefully you don't have to let Jesus take the wheel, but if he does, you'll feel better about your horrific
Yeah.
death.
I think the
That
basic understanding is
SOB
just that
took
they had
one
a
of my
lot of
wheels
oil.
once.
They had a
Also
lot
really
of oil.
fun.
They could dip their feet in it. Like they didn't have to just anoint themselves. They could just dip their foot in the oil. They had so much of it.
It's a really fun mod in GTA 5 too. Jesus take the wheel. If you're driving, the mod just switches Jesus to the driver's seat, and Jesus is just autopiloting.
Okay. On that same verse.
There's one more comment though.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Matt White says, panel, can you not show Tomer some respect? Only he among us reads and interprets Reformed Egyptian.
Aw.
It's a very limited skill.
I saw the Rosetta Stone today
Sailman.
in person. It was nice.
Sailman offers $4.99 and says, hey, Aaron, the song Kill Yourself makes me think of you.
So
Huh?
Yeah,
what?
that's
If he wants
that's
to
a
spend money to say that, great.
no. That's a reference
Maybe
I-
to
like
to
if I kill
a
myself, I
song
won't.
to a song that where people hear those words, and Ozzy is still telling people that's not what he's singing, not the
Oh
lyrics.
no,
No.
didn't you point out that they wrote that song? I seem to recall in one of your videos you pointing out that because of the satanic panic and all the
Yeah.
stupid bullshit with the backwards
was
messaging,
Stormtroopers of Death.
and
So-
they were
so-
just like, kill yourself, don't depend on no one else, and then nobody kills themselves. And look,
Hang it up and kill yourself now. Yes.
Oh, I thought he
Yeah,
meant like
For
when
whatever
he was,
reason, all these other people like Ozzy with his song "Suicide Solution" and Judas Priest had another one that was like questionable. It was you had to do backbending interpretation to come up with a suicide message out of that. But Stormtroopers of Death, straight up, kill yourself, don't rely on no one else, hang it up and kill yourself now. That was the whole song.
because it proved that people were not magically taken over by the music to follow the Satan impulses of the magic.
Mhm.
I-
There's a band called
Aaron, I
Sentenced
have
out of
I have
Norway
to ask.
that has
Did
a lot of songs like that.
I have to ask? Did they play that song backwards to see whether it then praised God? I'm just wondering.
no, it
I
just says lick
neglected to
yourself
play that one
instead.
backwards. Okay, so Jupe the Malignant, there's a cool name, offers $20, thank you, and says two things that always gave me a chuckle. Noah having to deal with boiling oceans and all the people, animals, and trees flying forward at 1,000 miles an hour when God stopped the sun in the sky.
yeah, for that though, where you wouldn't fly around 1,000 miles an hour
The Poles.
if the sun is small and local, and you believe in
With a magically
Fermented.
adjusting lampshade.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that you can light a disc on one side, but it only lights part of the disc.
No.
Yeah. Obviously, the story of Noah's Ark is God created Neptune, and that's where we lived. And then Noah built a spaceship and came to Earth.
Was that when
next-
what that magical planet that totes exists on the other side of the sun smashed into Neptune and created the Earth? Or have I been watching too much? Why do people
Is
laugh
that
at spirit
Nibiru?
science? Nibiru, yeah.
There you go.
There's a whole lot of Nibiru legends.
That's one of the flat Earth explanations for solar eclipses. Or
Oh, Nibiru gets in the way?
it's the dark sun. It covers the.
I haven't
Or
heard
maybe
that
it's
one
the
yet.
other
That's
one.
interesting. Yeah,
My-
some stories say the Nephilim came from Nibiru. They were actually aliens.
I
My
had
mother
I
thought
had-
that she found a photograph of that. It was somebody took a picture that got a double exposure so that the sun shows up twice in the same picture. It's like slightly touching itself. So it's
Yeah.
the sun and the sun just slightly touching. And my mother thought that was the planet Nibiru behind the sun. And that so disappointed me. I tried to show
Handles.
her. I showed her a picture of Venus with the sun behind it. So you have the sun, and you have this little teeny black dot in front of the sun. I said, "That's the planet Venus. Venus is the same size as the Earth. Venus here is in front of the sun by a long ways. So in the picture you're looking at, where they're two the same size, and you're saying that this one is behind that one, well, then they would have to be touching, weren't they? So there's a planet the size of the sun that looks exactly like the sun and is touching the sun, but everything's okay.
It's bigger than the sun, so it just looks like it's the same size.
Yeah, I was so embarrassed.
Gravitational lensing.
I was so
yeah.
embarrassed for her when she said that, and I realized the complete lack of any knowledge of astronomy or cosmology or just anything. I mean, the stars and planets are not they're not like billiard balls. You know, they don't like just sit and rest next to each other and stuff. It was so confusing. And my grandmother was even worse. She believed in the Copernican concentric circles.
That's
Oh,
an
so
odd
the
thing to believe, but
the crystalline spheres.
Yeah, she thought that the Earth is the biggest thing in the center of the universe,
Oh, that's
and
not
everything
Copernican,
else is increasingly small and just on outside shells around the Earth.
Yeah, those were supposed
Ah.
to be crystalline spheres on which the planets rotated around the Earth. You can do
Yeah,
that with a
that's
flat orb
Ptolemy's
around Earth.
model.
It's geocentric. Yeah, it's
I
the
had to-
one that dulls
I
the
had to
lunar
teach
lovers
my
love.
grandmother that the
Hmm.
Earth goes around the sun, and that the
Hmm.
sun is bigger than the Earth, and that in fact Jupiter is bigger than the Earth. And when I told my grandmother that there's a red spot on Jupiter, that the spot is bigger than the Earth, and it moves around, she said, "Oh, I hope it doesn't reach out and get us."
That's fair.
Okay,
Yeah.
so on
I
25.
look like my family, and so I know that I'm related because we look so much alike. But when anybody starts speaking, that's where the difference appears.
Whenever Aaron tells
This
stories about
is
his
why
family, I get
intelligent-
sad.
This is why intelligent people drink.
Hey, at least your family, some of them at least are heliocentrists.
Due to the recent weather in Europe, we get a lot of pictures. I forgot what the name of the phenomenon is, where you have ice crystals in the sky that make for 3 suns and all kinds of rays
Yeah,
surrounding
sundogs,
it.
I think
It's
called.
Oh.
incredibly cool to see. But I've seen people use that as an excuse that there are multiple suns and NASA's creating them.
Okay,
I
you
actually
guys.
completely forgot to mention this, but a few weeks ago when I was in Oxford and I came and I was like in the hotel and stuff, on the way to the hotel, I observed well, not UFO, it was what's the modern word for it?
Unknown aerial
UAP,
Phenomena? A UAP, yeah.
Yeah. We'll
But-
get there.
It was like but I knew it was some sort of ice crystal phenomena. So it was like a rainbow, but a ring, and like
Oh.
small, like in
Yeah,
like
like a
just like a
crystallized
rainbow
ring.
ring.
Yeah.
In the
Nice.
sky, like weird.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of it, really
That's-
good one.
You know
that's-
what,
But
guys?
I've
As
seen some of those
fun as
myself,
this
they're neat.
is,
Mm.
if you want to see someone taking down the crazy, insane people who think that the reflection of light inside a camera through a dust speck means that there's a planet Nibiru that's faking the sun or something, Logic has plenty of videos
Lens
dealing with the
flares.
crazies. Yes, the lens flares are actually planet
Yeah.
and occasionally
Michael Bay is a
plasma
prophet.
portals for aliens. So you know what?
Mhm.
Get some weed, watch you some Logic videos when you're in that vibe. I love
Whatever
it.
happened to Cool Hard Logic?
He's the one who
He made
I
some really
was
good
thinking
stuff.
of. Oh, he did. I still listen to his geocentrist and flat Earth because he has a great voice, and I can go to sleep to it. Also, he and the Living Dinosaur have some of the most fantastic insults in a British accent. Mentally subnormal gibbon. Even a mentally subnormal gibbon would have the mental acuity to be ashamed of this.
So I've started getting ads when I go onto YouTube. I really want to pay to just not have ads anymore, but I have to figure out where the content is that some of these ads that show up. So some of the ads that I've been seeing lately are this guy Greg Braden and his Gaia show,
Ugh.
where and so I don't feel so bad about my own family anymore now that I see that there's enough people out there who listen to Greg Braden and donate to him, that he's been able to that this is his gig for years.
If you ever want to feel better about your family, why do people laugh at spirit science is the only way I can stand spirit science contact Martimer 81 taking it out, because there's lots of face palming, and the suggestion for a oven glove is a good idea. But also, Jordan, you know how they say that atheists, there are thousands of gods you don't believe in, I just believe in one less. That might not be the case. He has never found a conspiracy theory or a god or a goddess or an absurd idea that he didn't think was worth at least believing for 5 minutes until the next drug trip.
I was going to do a video debunking Greg Braden, but then I realized the problem with that is that we need to have a fact in common. You can't begin to reason with somebody if there's no reality at all. Then what's the point in even trying? If they don't have a reality at all, if there's not one thing, I need two things to tie together to show that one thing doesn't fit. And with people like this, would they just make up their own reality? Then there's nowhere to go with that.
And then they change it next week and they don't notice.
Yeah.
Because no reality permanence at all. New Age is, I'm convinced, just sequential drug trips as a religion.
So I got a comment from Math Fairy, who says, have you guys thought about reading the JW version of the Bible as well, just so you can point out places where they warped the text for their own purposes?
You know what's funny? There are some places where their text is actually better.
Really?
The JW version doesn't have the pericope adulterae. Doesn't have the story of Jesus and the woman taken in adultery. It's completely missing. And the thing is, that's not an original story. We know that's a later addition. So, yeah, they actually left that one out.
They used the Geneva Bible for their translation, didn't they?
I'm unsure.
I don't know if you're, because they did do a more recent translation, I believe, recently. Just updating the English, but I don't know if they also use the Geneva Bible for that. Lloyd Evans actually was starting a series at one point. I don't know if he's finished it, where he went through some of the specific areas where they, deliberately messed with the text and in some cases messed with the newer edition of the text in order to line up with their newer ideas, taking out the stuff that might hint against shunning or whatnot. But yeah, that's a whole nother layer of fun.
So are we done with your commentary?
No. Yeah, I was waiting for you to finish.
Tomer?
Yeah, I was waiting for you all to finish. But I see another. No, that's not a comment. Okay, so your strength will equal your days. In Hebrew, it's ke'amecha dav'echa. The word dav'echa is a hapax, and its meaning is uncertain. Septuagint, Peshitta, and Targum Onkelos read your strength, a reading which Nelson and Lundbom accept. Saadia Gaon reads your bravery. Vulgate and Fragment Targum read, as the days of their youth, so will be the days of their age. Lundbom, citing Driver, writes that the Colin may wish for Asher continued strength as time wears on. Just a second. Okay. On verse 26, who rides across the heavens to help you. Tigay comments, God's riding to Israel's aid is mentioned in a number of passages, including those similar to verses 2 to 3, as in Habakkuk 3:8, Psalm 68:5, and compare 2 Samuel 22:11 and Isaiah 19:1. Casuto notes that these references are always in context of God punishing evildoers and delivering his servants. His vehicle is variously said to be a cherub, a cloud, wind, or a horse-drawn chariot. The same motif appears in the Babylonian and Canaanite literature, particularly with reference to storm gods, whose power is associated with prowess in warfare. It is natural for the Bible to appropriate such imagery for the Lord, not only because he incorporates the power of all the pagan deities, but because Israel's geography made it so dependent on rain that it was one of the primary media for the exercise of his providence.
And the horse has 8 legs and 16 wings.
And
Special
eyes
pony.
all over the wings.
Good. Yes.
On verse 27, the eternal God is your refuge. In Hebrew, it's Me'ona Elohei Kedem. This phrase is difficult. According to McCarthy, the word Me'ona has been taken as both a predicate in a nominal clause. Quote, the God of old is a dwelling or shelter, as in KJV and JPS, and as a virtual construct, the dwelling or shelter of the God of old, which all the other translations follow.
So the translation I was looking at, he subdues the ancient gods, which implies that there are ancient gods, and they're not even been destroyed necessarily. They've just been shot down.
The use is
Yeah.
The use is Elohei Kedem, which can mean the God of old, not necessarily gods of old.
Yeah, the translation. Well, I'm using the same translation, but yeah, it's the SBL. And when it comes to this stuff, they're generally pretty good. But it does say that the Hebrew for that is what the eternal God is a dwelling place, is how they translate that from the Hebrew. But they're going with a different text there,
Hmm.
and it does keep the polytheistic origins.
Which is good because, as we've seen time and time and time again, and especially clearly last time thanks to Dr. Kip, there are so many polytheistic origins to everything in here. And even in the English translations, once you see it, you can't unsee it. But, the more we get into the text and bits of the Hebrew text and just the references to Asherah alone, never mind the various Elohim, there's no doubt that this never started as monotheism or even henotheism, that was a later adaptation of just people who worshipped gods the same as everyone else.
On verse 28, Jacob will dwell secure. In Hebrew, it's Badad Ein Yaakov. The word Ein has been read as fountain in the Peshitta, Ibn Ezra, and KJV, which according to Lundbom makes no sense in the context. He notes that many prefer to read Ein as An, meaning either dwell or abode, according to Tigay, Nelson, and JPS. Septuagint reads alone in Jacob's land. Vulgate reads Ein as I, and so the eye of Jacob.
And Lebowski reads the dude abides.
On 29, your enemies cower before you. Hebrew for cower is vayikachashu, from the root kaf chet shin. Some, like the Septuagint, Targum, Bechosho, and Chizkuni, and KJV, read the root as to lie, i.e., the enemies will lie about their hatred and pretend that they love you. Luzzatto, however, rejected this reading because flattery is not complete surrender or an acceptance of God's might. He suggested instead that kaf chet shin means to deny, i.e., they denied their previous bravery. Similarly, the Vulgate reads, thy enemies shall deny thee. Other suggestions, your enemies will come fawning to you, by Nelson, your enemies will come cringing to you, by JPS and Lundbom, and your enemies will be proved false, by the Peshitta. And finally, you will tread on their heights. The Hebrew for height is bamotemo, which is derived from the word bamot. Some choose reading bamot here as high places, like KJV, BDB, and Lundbom. However, most early translations, Nelson and Tigay, choose reading bamot as necks or backs. Nelson, for example, writes that setting one's foot on a defeated enemy's back is a symbol of triumph. Tigay writes that Bama, in the sense of back, is found in Ugaritic, and that the image of stepping on the backs or necks of defeated enemies is attested in the Bible, like Joshua 10:25, 1 Kings 5:17, and Psalms 110:1, in the ancient Near Eastern literature as well, and in War Scroll 12:11.
Also in Job, as well, and it definitely plays a part in that defeating of Tiamat and treading on her back kind of thing. And I think there sometimes it's translated as like waves because you're talking about like the crests of the sea or whatever, but it's instead on its back. So yeah, that is an interesting.
That makes sense. And it's definitely an imagery that we see a lot in the concept of, battle and victory and the hero standing triumphant with his foot on the, and you get that with Michael and the fall of Lucifer and all the Christian art and everything, very much standing on the body of your prostrate foe is very, very dramatic and ego driven.
And that's it from a commentary on this chapter.
Okay. Are we finally ready to move on to the next chapter?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's finish.
Is he going to
this.
die? Is he going to actually die?
Let me see if I've got them. I might not have the right the right translation here. Just as he is sharing your adventures, others are sharing his. They were with him when he hid from the boys at the bookstore.
No,
they
that's
were
not
with
it.
him when he.
Oh. I
Sorry, that was a different never-ending story. Okay.
Bastion.
Oh.
Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead, as far as Dan, all Naphtali, all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land which I swore to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command.
Of course.
Then suddenly the animator had a fatal heart attack. He was buried in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he... Damn it. Okay.
Sudden kaiju.
Moses was 100... Where was I?
Verse
About
7.
there.
120
God
years
didn't
old
kill
when
him,
he
Godzilla
died.
did.
His sight was unimpaired, and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Joshua, son of Nun, was... So he didn't have a mom? Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him.
Oh my.
And the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, even though no man has seen my face and lived. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord had sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all the servants of the entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thus endeth Deuteronomy. Thus endeth the Pentateuch.
Yeah. So
passes Moses.
so fun stuff. Of course, the citations of, there has not since arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, and no one knows where he was buried until this day, stuff like that. That's stuff that I'm going to get into more next week. So I am almost done preparing a presentation on the Deuteronomistic history and the scholarship surrounding it, the different frameworks that we can use to analyze it. And of course, Deuteronomy is kind of part of that, at least part of it is. So it is kind of like a mishmash, I guess. So I'm very excited to get into that and the different ways that was understood. But of course, the most popular Jewish understanding is that Joshua wrote this, uh, because how could he write about his own death, right? But of course, then there is the far less common understanding that he wrote it, while crying.
Yeah, I have comments on
I don't
this
know if
as well.
that's less. I don't know. Is that really less? I mean, I imagine
I
most,
mean,
like the
maybe
entire
among
Orthodox.
adults,
Less.
it's less. It's like you. That's sort of the. I could see it being the children's story version that you get on the felt board in Torah school or something, where poor Moses writing about his death. But like you pointed out, unto this day is rather pointless if unto this day is a week and a half after he died. There's been nobody like him in the past.
It's
we
also
Not since lunch.
weird that the person who helped bury him doesn't know where his tomb is.
Well, and there were later traditions that arose around that. Some
Because
of which are
Moses buried himself.
Impressive.
Yes, actually.
Oh,
Yes,
Yeah, it
very
actually.
doesn't say
good.
anything.
You are right.
And,
Yes.
Well,
and the angel
Yes.
took up his body to heaven. Paul references that, which was a popular idea at the time, apparently, that the angel of the Lord had to fight Satan for Moses.
Oh, that's
But he
right.
but he only
Right,
said,
yeah.
"The Lord rebuke you." And you can see Paul is talking about this in the New Testament, but it's obviously a reference to something that was popularly understood at the time, even though it's not actually in the text. But whatever. Yeah, and not to mention that it's same as in Genesis, in the naming of the lands, in the naming of Gilead to Dan and Naphtali and the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of these names in the actual text itself are named way the fuck later, especially Dan. There's no way that they would have written the name Dan had it been written at this time. So
right.
Moses didn't
And
write shit. Get over it.
Yeah. The excuse that's given by rabbinical commentators about why Moses' burial place is unknown is because God didn't want necromancers to use his bones to.
Like Jesus would.
Well, the bones of the prophet Elisha's tomb, because his body was actually left, and they apparently tossed a dead guy in there during a raid and ran away, and he was brought back to life immediately by touching the bones of Elisha. So apparently prophet bones have very strong bone magic.
I got a comment once about my bone magic.
I was thinking on the subject of bone magic, it's not exactly heartwarming, but at least it shows a pattern that the touching of one's younger apprentices has been a tradition all the way back to the very first prophets and things.
Maybe it was a mistake to make the passing of the Spirit of the Lord come from touching your young protege. Just
At
given
some point
history.
earlier in this chapter, they were describing someone else as the upright one, but I guess that would be Lawrence now.
That's it. Never mind.
Well, he was at some point.
Okay, I'll start my commentary. First, on verse 1. The Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan. Lundbom comments, the panorama proceeds counterclockwise from where Moses is standing, beginning with Gilead in the near north, going further north, west, and south, and ending with Tsoar in the near south. Included is Transjordan land already taken and settled, as well as land to be taken once Israel crosses the Jordan. Gilead was in Transjordan, between the Yarmouk River and in the north and roughly Heshbon in the south. It had already been settled after Israel defeated the Amorite kings Sihon and Og. Dan, which became the northernmost outpost in Israel, as in 1 Samuel 3:20, from Dan to Beersheba, and was located at the foot of Mount Hermon near the headwaters of the Jordan, would not have been visible from Nebo. Dan was formerly called Laish or Leshem, having been renamed after it was taken by the Israelites in Joshua 19:47 and Judges 18 verses 27 to 29. The narrator is running long after the conquest. Laish is mentioned in the Egyptian execration texts and in the Mari documents. Excavations at Tel Dan, formerly Tel El Kadi, show occupation during the late Bronze and early Iron Ages. End quote. Samaritan text on verses Samaritan text on verses 1 to 3 reads, "From the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, as far as the western sea." End quote. It removes most of verse 2 and all of verse 3. And McCarthy writes, "It could be argued, perhaps, that the Samaritan text is somehow idealistic. It gives a general view of ideal boundaries in order to show how the divine promise to Abraham will be fulfilled in Genesis 15, provided that the commandments are kept strictly in Deuteronomy 11. Avraham Tal notes that, quote, Masoretic text is less idealistic and more concrete, describing the actual extent of the promised land as about to be conquered by Joshua. Masoretic text gives very precise details, almost to the point of an atomistic delineation of borders. Perhaps this reflects an attempt to have the boundaries conform to Joshua's intended territory. Is M emphasizing the presence of Judea, or is Samaritan text interested in blurring it? End quote. It is difficult to decide which one gives access to the original, quote unquote.
Well, Laish is the name of the land that it would have had at that time, that was later named Dan during one of the, conquesty bits. But
yeah.
I mean,
On
one of
ver-
the
sorry.
there is kind of like basically the question of why they're using like later names for the places. One of the I don't know. It's not really. I don't know if it's explaining this question, but one of the things that Rashi says, which is interesting, is God showing him these places. He's not showing, oh, that's the land. This is what it looks like. He was showing him a vision of the future and being like, there's Naphtali. This what's it called again? This tribe in the future, they're going to do this bad thing, and then this, and here's Dan in the future, they're going to do this bad thing.
So it's like the really boring part of Paradise Lost, where Gabriel puts Eve to sleep and takes Adam and basically tells him everything that's going to happen according to the Bible. I mean,
maybe It says here for Dan.
Same. No, it was totally just, God. So God was showing him a lie for the last time. Gotta love that.
On verse 4, I have let you see it with your eyes. Weinfeld proposed that this act was not just to give Moses one final satisfaction, but it is an ancient judicial act, where seeing grants the right to own or hold lands. Nelson writes that Yahweh showed Moses all this, giving him phenomenal sharpness of sight, or perhaps prophetic insight into its deeper meaning. Compare Amos 7 verses 1, 4, and 7. Verse 5, and Moses died there. Gregory of Nyssa writes, Moses' death is recorded to have been even more sublime than his life. He died on a mountain peak and left behind neither trace nor memorial of his earthly burden in life. The impress of beauty was not altered by time, but remained unchangeable in the changeable nature. End quote. Traditional commentators.
So that's Gregory of Nyssa, the Cappadocian father?
Yes.
Okay.
Traditional commentators who believed in Mosaic authorship of the Torah debated if Moses wrote this segment and onwards. Rashi summarizes the opinions of Chazal. Quote, is it possible that Moses died, yet he wrote Moses died there? Rather, until this point, Moses wrote. Beyond this point, Joshua wrote. Rabbi Meir said, is it possible that the book of the Torah was incomplete when he said, take this book of the Torah in 31:26? Rather, the Holy One, blessed is he, dictated while Moses wrote with teardrops. And as
the last pages are for you, Sam.
As the Lord had said, in Hebrew it's al pi Yehovah, according to the mouth. This idiom generally means according to the command, and is found in Numbers 3:16, 9:23, Deuteronomy 1:26, and 8:3. It also appears in the description of Aaron's death in Numbers 33:38. Chazal, however, took al-pi literally, that God killed him by a divine kiss, as in Moed Katan 28a, Targums Pseudo Jonathan, and Rashi.
Yahweh the Dementor.
Oh my God, Yahweh is a Dementor.
New fan fiction.
The kiss of death.
It makes so much sense. He steals joy from everything. And you can actually get rid of him by having genuine memories of happiness.
I can feel the presence of God. It's freezing.
On
Oh,
verse
just finished church. What do people say? Oh, I need some chocolate.
on verse 6, he buried him. It seems that God buried Moses, as is suggested by Targums Pseudo-Jonathan, Mishnah Sota 1.9, and Rashi. Ibn Ezra proposed that Moses buried himself inside a cave in the valley. Sforno said if he Sforno asked if he did bury himself, it would have been I wrote it.
So he went into a
incorrect.
cave and simply just, I'm guessing he just hit the button on the detonator, or maybe
That was Armageddon. He didn't get
used
to do
his
anything.
staff to beat on the roof until the whole thing collapsed.
He said that you shall not pass and slammed his staff down.
I've mentioned this before. The tradition of there were like certain things. I think it's in the Talmud that says there was like 12 things, 10 things that were created before the world was created. A pair of tongues, because you can't make tongues without tongues apparently. And the mouth of the donkey, and one of them is the burial place of Moses. So I wonder if it was like quite modern, with like those glass slide automatic doors, so like Moses was able to like walk in, lie down.
Oh yeah, it
Well-
could be just like that in Zelda Breath of the Wild, the rejuvenation pod kind of a vibe. But yeah, it's that thing I mentioned with the them taking up Moses' body to heaven so that nobody worships it or does bone magic with it.
Yeah.
Do we have that in the commentaries? I said bone magic, not boner magic.
Well, I haven't finished
Um,
the
It could be both.
commentary.
Yeah, it's there is a comment on
Not with
verse
humans.
6. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't finished it. So I wanted to say Sforno said that if he did bury himself, it would have been his disembodied soul that accomplished this. Rashbam interprets the he impersonally and writes that since no one knows Moses' burial place, quote, whoever buried him, end quote. Septuagint, Fragment Targum, and 4Q Deuteronomy L read, they buried him. McCarthy notes Wever's opinion that it would have been unthinkable for the Greek translator to have God bury Moses.
Did nobody think of maybe he did like some other movies have done, where the body just fades away, just evaporates?
I like what someone said in the comments earlier, that his body just poofed into dust because he was so fucking old.
Yeah, there's a comment here. Eric Wander says, was Moses in good mental and physical health at age 120? This chapter says yes, nor his strength gone. But in Deuteronomy 31, he was no longer able to lead the people. Any commentary? Well, it seemed to me the dude was not right at any point.
Yeah. He was pretty fucked in the head. I mean,
Yeah.
he did interrupt his journey to go fulfill his destiny to have his wife cut off the tip of his son's dick to prevent God from murdering him. So, that was
To
always
change
fun.
God's mind, because God didn't see that coming.
Well, who sees flying foreskins coming, really? It's a little bit out of left field.
That's
but,
a very niche pastime.
you would hope. You would
Whoop,
hope.
duck.
But
Only in the modern day. Apparently, it was quite the thing back then.
well,
Oh yeah, like
David did
David's.
buy his first wife with a
Mhm.
bag of dicks. But yeah, I don't know. He was never right in the head. But with the descending and breaking down it, I'm kind of wondering if he took his last Horcrux up the mountain and smashed it and then disintegrated.
There was a puddle in that cave. I'm melting.
He was a witch. That explains a lot, actually.
Did he weigh the same as a duck?
Oh, that's why the Red Sea, the Sea of Reed split. He was hydrophobic.
Uh, Okay. That's on that same verse. To this day, no one knows where his grave is. Weinfeld comments, Moses' death is shrouded in mystery. It could be that the Torah intentionally wished to hide his burial place so it wouldn't be a worship site for the dead, which the Torah lists with the idolatry practices that it wants to abolish, or that there is a hint here of a general rejection towards a cult of personality. However, Origen proposed that God concealed Moses' burial place so that Moses wouldn't be worshipped as a god. In any case, the disappearance of his grave contributes to the spiritualization of the religion, according to Gersonides. An ancient Jewish tradition, which is preserved in Talmud Sotah 13b and Josephus, Antiquities 4:3-6, claims that Moses rose to the heavens. The fact that Elijah, whose image, life, and death as described in the Bible are similar in many ways to those of Moses, also rose to the heavens at a place located near Mount Nebo in 2 Kings 2:11 forward, might explain the creation of this tradition. New scholars, including Sigmund Freud, propose that Moses was murdered and secretly buried to hide any evidence. However, there's no basis for this claim.
Yeah, hell no. Of course, there's no basis. Fucking Freud's biblical analysis is so Freud. Like it is. It is so
Clearly,
infuriating.
Yahweh was obsessed with his mother.
Who was also his wife.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Like
Ugh.
we had to read through some of Freud's stuff in like one of my religious studies courses, and it was like this dude has a problem.
I like how you can just use the word Freud as a pejorative. I mean,
Yeah.
or it, as
When
a
it comes to
criticism.
analysis, yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Jesus would have had a weird relationship with his mother. I mean, if
he
he
was
was
his own
also
dad from a sense.
if he was also the one who impregnated her.
Well, that's why we have the Trinity to make it less creepy. More irrational, but less creepy. You know, Freud is
Is it
honestly
though?
well, it's a comparative term. It's yeah. But honestly though, like the fucked up sex and murdering your family bit, if anything in the history of human literature has ever justified that perspective and analysis, surely it's the Bible. Like it at last year and a half, I'm looking at this. It's always so fucked up. It's so fucked. It's Freud levels of fucked up very often, and that's disturbing.
I should note that Afahat suggested that Moses' burial is not mentioned so that his adversaries, quote unquote, wouldn't know of it and remove his bones from his tomb. And Paulinus
Or
writes
his
that
supporters.
and Paulinus writes that one of his friends buried him.
He had
One
friends.
of his friends or one of his friends?
They
were
One
just
of them.
roommates, I swear.
Oh.
Okay, nor his strength gone. In Hebrew, lo nas lecho. The word lecho is derived from lach. BDB dictionary renders it a moisture or freshness, from the root lamed chet chet. Rashi writes that it refers to Moses' moistness, i.e., quote, he was not subject to decay, his countenance was not disfigured, end quote. Vulgate reads, neither were his teeth moved, end quote. Peshita, nor were his cheeks wrinkled. And they probably read lecho from lechi, which means chin, jaw, or cheek. Targum Onkelos reads, his facial radiance did not change. Lundbom renders, his vigor had not abated. Ibn Ezra and Tigay,
Oh, no.
he had not become wrinkled. Nelson notes that while most take this as a reference to life force in general, sexual potency has also been suggested.
I
Very
dare
important.
say.
On verse 9, Joshua was verse 9, Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom. Tigay comments, Joshua was filled with a wisdom that God gifted to him so that he could govern Israel. Compare spirit of wisdom / spirit of God that filled Bezalel and the people who built the tabernacle in Exodus 28:3 and 31:3. Solomon asked God for such a gift to enable him to govern justly in 1 Kings 3, verses 7 through 12. And Isaiah promised Israel a future king who would be graced with the same gifts in Isaiah 11, verses 1 through 5. It is characteristic of Deuteronomy, that it identifies the qualities given to Joshua as intellectual ones. In contrast, according to Numbers 27, verses 15 to 23, Joshua already possessed spirit of an unspecified type when God chose him to succeed Moses, and Moses transferred some of his hod, perhaps authority or majesty, to Joshua.
It's easy,
You're muted, Aaron.
Yeah, so that's what happened. Joshua offed the old man, took over his power.
He sucked the magic from his bones.
Yep, tossed Moses down a well.
It's interesting too because spirit, like in this context, after the Christian world, it reads as Holy Spirit too easily in the mind. But in this case, it's basically magic mojo from God. God is like what's the D&D class where you have a patron that gives you magic?
A priest?
No, D&D.
Yeah, a priest. A cleric.
A cleric?
I was thinking more the one where you have to sell your soul to an evil being.
Oh, warlock.
Warlock, thank you. Because I gotta say, Yahweh is definitely giving more warlock vibes than, celestial vibes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just a, different source.
So Mark Smith offers $2 and says, Moses partook of too much of the burning bush.
Yeah.
Yeah, equally valid explanation. Rachel Light says, to me, it seems that like there was more than one Moses, like there was more than one Mary. Could they just be popular names back then? Well, as a couple of us have already alluded to, it seems that we have like a common story that was attributed to more than one person.
Mm-hmm. And bits, popular mythological tropes ended up, and then it grew into something, and then someone used it for their own political ends, and it's kind of snowballs. It's a big fish story. Yeah. It started with a minnow or two.
And if you have an original story, but it's attributed to somebody that nobody ever heard of, then it has been done a number of times that we'll just assign this story to this other person who is more well known, and now it just becomes one of their stories.
Yeah.
And then Eric Wander gifted one R&R membership, and Caden Pat offers $9.99, says, does the biblical Moses bear any resemblance to the slavery-hating character in the Ten Commandments?
In the movie?
I'm guessing.
The Charlton Heston guy?
I'm guessing.
Charlton Heston's awfully Caucasian, so I wouldn't say he resembled, an
He's
Egyptian Moses,
Caucasian.
but yeah.
Oh, and just by the way, Moses was not a common name. I'm almost sure it's a made-up name that is like pseudo Egyptian sounding.
Also, by the way,
Egyptian, but...
also by the way, Eric Wander has great aim,
like Moses,
because Lawrence got that membership.
Nice, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, Milwaukee atheists.
I mean, the Hebrew isn't Moses, obviously, it's Moshe, so Moshe could have been like thought of as, oh, that sounds Egyptian to the people back then.
Well,
Reformed Egyptian.
Moses is part Hammurabi, part Snefru.
Sargon cards.
Okay, on that same verse, Moses laid his hands on him. This ceremony is found in Numbers 27, verses 18 and 23. Nelson notes that the ceremony in Numbers is described as a transferal of not of spirit, but of authority, as seen in verse 20. Samaritan text reads, laid his hand, to assimilate with Numbers 27:18. Hand in the singular.
Yeah, but in this case, it's not what some people might be suspecting is you have to put your fingers right on the side of the temple of the other person, and then you do the transference of the magical godliness.
My mind to your mind. My thoughts to your thoughts.
To your thoughts.
It's also great evidence. It's also great evidence that the God isn't omniscient, because he would have known that laid his hands on him in these days have totally different meaning.
especially in a religious context.
Oh
That
Lord,
too.
yeah, unfortunately. But it is worth noting that spirit and authority here are not mutually exclusive. This is a very authoritarian context, and magical authority from God entitles you to literally have power over certain elemental forces. To command the rains not to rain because, as Elijah did, to command waters to part as Moses did, to command life to return as Elisha did. It's magic authority. It like itself, the stones will cry out if the people don't, because nature itself responds to God's magical authority and literally does things in this fantasy realm that is totally real, very real.
It raises an interesting point. I heard a thing the other day about how the Genesis 1 is different from the rest of the Bible because it borrows so heavily from the story of Marduk, where the God, which in the original was Marduk, but later is Yahweh, speaks things into existence. That's his magic power, and we don't see the same speaking power in the rest of Genesis, really. But we
No.
do see it in the other prophets, like Moses and Elijah. They have the ability to speak. They can't create a universe, but they can change little things, which implies that
cast
that's power
spells.
drawn from the prophets.
Yeah.
Now, if it's true that this Genesis 1 component was taken during the Babylonian exile, then any prophet with the power to speak magic into being would have to be invented after the Babylonian exile, when God gained that power.
Well,
Maybe?
Well, I mean, yeah, I kind of date the a vast amount of the Pentateuch to exilic or post-exilic.
definitely the compilation, although some of the text, it's hard to say. Yeah, I could see that, but it's also worth noting that God is still not all powerful, because this spirit is a finite resource. Elisha asks Elijah to transfer his spirit onto give me your magic power, basically pass it on to me. Joshua is said to have had Moses pass his magic onto him. It's like, and then I have no more magic and I'm gonna go die.
Okay, on verses 10 through 12, Nelson comments, this final tribute to Moses also validates the book of Deuteronomy. Never again serves as support for Deuteronomy's unparalleled and permanent authority, perhaps lest 18 verses 15 to 19 be misunderstood. Prophets like Moses would appear, but none would have his unmediated access to Yahweh's presence, i.e. face. The repetition of all in verses 11 through 12 highlights the signs and wonders of Moses as confirming evidence of his prophetic office, in some tension with the outlook of 13:3, which is true in the Old Testament. That these deeds were done in the sight of all Israel implies that Moses performed them not just to oppose Pharaoh, but so the people would believe him, seen in Exodus 4:30-31 and 14:31. On verse 10, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. Lundbom comments, this is probably an attempt to make Moses greater than the 8th century prophets who had arisen recently. For example, Amos, Hosea, Micah, and Isaiah. Medieval Jewish scholars used this text to refute later claims of a prophet who would supersede Moses, such as occurred in Christianity and Islam, according to Tigay. The claim about Muhammad being the greatest of prophets, however, was made by Arabs in another religion. A polemic against Christianity is more understandable, since the New Testament claims that John the Baptist was a prophet, the greatest of all prophets, according to Matthew 11, verses 9 through 11, and that Jesus was a prophet, especially in the Gospel of John 4:19-44, 6:14, 7:40, and 52, and 9:17. Were made by first century, and these were made by first century CE Jews. But this was certainly not the original intent of the verse. The narrator is speaking of prophets who had arisen up to that time. What is more, according to Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 through 18, Moses says Yahweh will raise up in Israel another prophet the likes of himself. and people are to listen to him. Jeremiah appears to understand himself as this prophet like Moses.
Prophets are always so humble.
I mean, it's a time indicative of authorship, but
Hmm.
the thing is, yeah. So this section, if we're talking about, I'm guessing this would have been written also during, either the exilic or post-exilic period. Although there is a chance that it could have been written during Josiah's reforms. That seems to be a pretty likely idea. Some people think that this section would have been written during the reign of Hezekiah, but it's I feel like the influence that we get from the Assyrian stuff shows that at least some amount of time has passed where they are now implementing Assyrian motifs. Yeah,
The last few verses definitely seem like they would be trying to centralize power around the Mosaic law and the temple. So I could see that as being
Josianic.
Deuteronomist. Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, because the first layer would have been definitely Josianic.
Another failed prophecy, it just kind of consistency.
God gets everything wrong. Subtitle for the Bible.
I mean, not exactly, but I get what you're saying. I understand where you got that, but yeah, not quite right. He was full of the spirit of wisdom, so it wouldn't be quite the same as being a prophet.
I have to jump in real quick. I had an internet connection that wasn't working great, so OBS disconnected, but it has reconnected. So my apologies for that.
Oh yes, everyone says they were buffering.
Oh.
Okay, it's back.
All our faces were frozen.
No.
Okay, now it seems.
And this was like the most important stuff we said in the last 5 minutes.
I know, we solved philosophy.
How long? It looked like it was only for about 1 or 2
We figured out 42 what?
Okay, my final comment to this chapter and for the Pentateuch, whom the Lord knew face to face. Tigay notes that the word for know, yada, can also be read as choose, as seen in Genesis 18:19, Exodus 33:12, and Jeremiah 1:5. Thus, the phrase could be read, whom the Lord singled out face to face, as JPS renders. God speaking with Moses face to face is seen in Exodus 33:13 and Numbers 12:8, with the latter claiming that Moses saw God. Tigay, however, notes that Deuteronomy doesn't use face to face literally, as is clear from 5:4, which says that God spoke to Israel face to face out of the fire, after making it clear that the people did not see him in 4 verses 12 and 15. He writes that Deuteronomy uses the phrase to mean in person, directly, and without mediation. The point of the text, he writes, is that Moses has the most direct contact with God of any prophet, and therefore had the clearest knowledge of him and his will.
And everybody saw that God's feet were on lapis lazuli when they went to look upon God.
I think that was in Exodus.
In Exodus, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which
also
is also reflected
in
Ezekiel
Ezekiel as well.
Yeah,
Everyone saw.
Everyone saw totally, except out of the fire, except that lapis lazuli is Turk. Never mind. Also, when it says Moses knew God, we that's not the same word as is used when people say no in the biblical sense.
I mean, it is, but it doesn't but from the context.
Oh, now we know why God showed us back.
The phrasing in which you're talking about is very idiomatic.
Yeah, it would be written differently as well.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah, that's it for my commentary.
Yay!
Yay!
Thus says the Lord.
Yes.
Thus saith the Lord. The Pentateuch.
Yep. And then somebody comments, phrasing. All right. So we begin. We're out of Deuteronomy. We're out of the Pentateuch at last.
Oh,
Is there like a category name for what we get into now? Like there was
Prophets.
For the Pentateuch?
Yes.
Yeah.
Prophets.
Yeah, it is the prophets.
That's where
Although
they make the money.
there are some other designations that you will hear. So there's going to be the Deuteronomistic history. There's going to be, well, you could also hear terms like Tetratuch and Hexatuch, but those are later
Wisdom
scholarly
text.
creations. Yeah, wisdom text. Once we get to the writings,
Have we agreed on which like order we're following? Which
Are we following the Christian
We're
order? I
following the
thought we
Christian
were.
one.
Oh, we
Okay.
are. Okay.
yeah. So, oh, that's right. Okay, so I feel
Sorry,
like
those
for
Bibles
more,
are just more
When was
widely
that
available.
decided?
they are, yeah. I
Because
feel
it's the more common one.
it
so.
is common, yeah. I also feel like we should go with like the Catholic version too, at least the Catholic canon, because it does
It's the
include
most-
more things.
Are we going to
and-
include Judah?
All right. So what Joshua was
I
still
wanna
next,
include-
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Joshua's still next.
Okay.
Well, here's what I'm thinking, because we should include stuff like First Maccabees, for example.
Okay.
That's going to give us a lot of context, which I think is very important. See, for our show, we did Maccabees on the Friday Apocryphal podcast, but I think that because we're not doing an apocryphal thing here, it would be useful to cover that.
Would it be? Would we be doing, let's say, all the books that are in the Hebrew Bible first, and then moving into Apocrypha? Is that it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So we could like wrap up. Oh, that's the Hebrew Bible done.
Yeah.
All right.
You're
All right.
muted,
So
Lily.
let me check the calendar. Yes. Okay. Still good for next week. I will have to take 2 weekends off after that. I'm going to be in transit in the Caribbean.
Not including Thursday.
Piracy?
This includes Tuesdays.
No, if you're open on Tuesdays, we can discuss doing Tuesdays.
I can do Tuesdays.
All right.
Okay.
Let me quickly check my my class schedule, because we got classes coming up this week.
Mm.
So
Okay.
I just
Alright.
have to make sure.
I also have class the next day, but I'll try to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
All right, well,
So
let's get together an email after this and let me know when our next show is going to be. Are we waiting until a week from today, or are we going to do something on Tuesday?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Maybe
like-
not. I think the issue, what Thomas was saying, is that like twice a week is a problem. It's problematic. So if we were to do this Tuesday, then we wouldn't do Saturday, let's say. But
No,
Okay.
only when Aaron is not available for Saturdays.
yeah. That's
Gotcha.
Oh,
Because I'm going to be
so-
I'm not going to be available on Tuesday either, because I'm going to be in the Caribbean.
Okay. I see.
Yeah, so Saturday, then
so-
Tuesdays probably is what could work.
Yeah.
possibly.
So, I mean, so the Tuesday prior, and then we can maybe can do a little bit of catch up to make up for what we missed.
Okay.
Okay. Works for me.
Arn, you have
What
one.
about
You have one
Relish?
more comment.
All right. The redneck atheist says, but we know what no means in the Bible. So God knew Moses being homoerotic again. Well,
Biblically.
He says it
no,
like it
anyway,
happens
yeah.
enough.
It kind of does.
He did show him his glory.
And his back.
That reminded. I did look it up. The thing that I saw when I thought it might have been something called a glory ring, but apparently it's called a nacreous cloud. It was only round because it was like a very small cloud.
Uh-huh.
If you look up
Yeah,
nacreous cloud, it's very cool.
Mm.
Like,
A glory is
clouds
a
that
different
reflect
thing.
that really-
Glory
It's
ring.
when you're in a fog bank right at sunrise, so the rainbow occurs behind you and your own shadow acts like a condensation nuclei for the light. That's a glory.
That's not a glory.
That's so much different than what I was thinking.
I'll say I should be available
Same for me.
Tuesday nights if we ever need to.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So let's get together an email whether we're going to do this Tuesday, whether we're do next Tuesday.
All right.
Right.
I'm
Anyway.
flexible, but
Either way,
I've heard that.
Peter, I'm going to be sending you a presentation, a
Okay,
PowerPoint
no problem.
for whenever the next show is.
I'll have it ready.
All right. Well, then.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. And I got another project to jump into. So as always, thank you very much. See you sometime next week.
And
Bye-bye,
join the
everybody.
Discord.
Yeah, join the
Yes.
Discord. Bye, everybody.